please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Hello. Good evening. I'll call the November 6th Select Board meeting to order. And I am pleased to announce that the home rule petition has passed and we are now officially the Select Board. We have one change to the agenda. We are not going to be doing the Genetic Mice Steering Committee appointment until next week.
That appeal officer matter can come off because that can be done by town manager.
Okay. Announcements?
This meeting is being video and audio recorded is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2 is the Nantucket Center for Elder Affairs and Council on Aging has a proclamation for 2020 to be the year of the Nantucket Senior. We have the proclamation here, and I think someone on the board is going to read it.
I would be happy to read it. Proclamation 2020, the year of the Nantucket Senior. Whereas our senior year-round community of 55 years and older is growing from 2010 census report of 2,512 to the projected figure of 3,700 by 2035. And whereas our senior year-round community adds to the quality of life on Nantucket through their careers, their volunteerism, and active living. And whereas our senior seasonal community is continually adding to our island population, and many are retiring to our community. And whereas our senior community have been contributing physically and financially to the fabric of life throughout their lives on island. And whereas there will be future needs that must be met to ensure that this segment of our population continue with an active, social, and healthy future. And therefore, we as a community take this opportunity to recognize and thank our senior community by designating the year 2020 the year of the Nantucket Senior. Signed this 6th day of November. And thank you all for being here for that. And look forward to some things we'll probably be asking for at town meeting in relation to this.
Okay, moving on with announcements. We have a Veterans Day observance ceremony, which will be held on Monday, November 12th at 11 a.m. at the Federal Street Memorial next to the town building. There will be a ceremony at the Legion right after the, will be a reception following the ceremony right after. Where did Terry go? Terry Norton, were you going to say a little bit more?
Hi, I'm Terry Norton. I am the adjutant for Post 82, the Byron El Salvaro American Legion. And I just wanted to add to that information. Everybody in this room is invited. Every town department is invited. We would love to see you all out there. The police, the fire, not working. We will be forming up at the Legion Hall on 21 Washington Street at 10:30 and marching to the Federal Building or Federal Street Memorial. If the weather is inclement, we will be holding the service or the ceremony in the Legion Hall. I think we had to do that last year, and it worked. And so I hope you can all make it out there. And we have, as usual, a huge crowd. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. A recurring announcement is that Saturday, April 4th, 2020 will be the annual town meeting. The warrant is currently open for citizen warrant article submittals until November 18th at 4, and there's a citizen warrant article packet available online. If you are considering a citizen warrant article, please locate that packet. It's also available in the town administration office and the town clerk's office.
This is the public comment portion of our agenda for anything that's otherwise not on our agenda for discussion.
Hello, Steve Bender here, 73 Orange Street. Madam Chairman, through you, I'd like to have permission to ask the selectman a question. Is that possible?
Yes, but we might get back to you with an answer depending on
Well, the question
the
is this.
content.
Folks, the question is this. How many of you have read a Massachusetts DEP Chapter 91 amnesty license from beginning to end? I knew Mr. Fee
Yeah,
did. And the reason I asked that,
I don't have much of a life, Steve.
I've read many of them, and but I did bring one up a couple of meetings ago in October, and these Chapter 91 amnesty licenses, amongst many other things that come up before the selectmen's meeting, are rife with legal terms, contracts. In fact, the Chapter 91 amnesty licenses say in very clear English that whatever the facility is that is subjected to this amnesty license must operate the facility in a way that no federal, state, or local bylaw is violated. So the reason I bring all this up is how, it reminds me of my Tai Chi master, how can you hold meeting after meeting without a town council? Since the air is filled with legal problems. In other words, is there a town council? I see him occasionally. It's very hard for me to get him. When I try to get him, Dawn calls me. So I'm asking you,
So-
why is he not here?
I
For
called you this
40
afternoon to talk about that.
For 40 years, excuse me, yeah, for 40 years, I've been coming to selectmen's meetings, probably 50, and I've been in many of them. The first 10 or 20 years, we had town councils who were always present. They were primarily duds, and by duds I mean they were not fast on their feet. In other words, a question would come up, they wouldn't have an answer. We then hired Deutsch Williams, and we happened to get a guy who was fast on his feet, and would always have some answer. And it was a pleasure to come to the selectmen's meeting. And now, I think we're in the worst position we've been in 50 years. Not that Mr. Giorgio is not a brilliant lawyer, but he's not here. That's it. You guys got to think about this. Oh, Madam Chairman, the information I brought up in public session about the fact that both the Conservation Commission and the First Winthrop Corporation are not obeying the Chapter 91 amnesty license. I would like to see that on the agenda, because that's a very important thing that should be discussed. Anyway, it's my request. And after that, I'd like to see on the agenda the fact that we have no lead abatement policy in this town. And does anybody in the Selectmen's Board know how that came about? Should I tell you, or is it
No,
getting-
I don't want to get into it right now
Okay.
because we do have
I will-
strict
I'll
lead laws
explain
in
it to you next
Massachusetts.
time,
But
Madam Chairman.
I believe that we have addressed both of those questions, but let's,
Thank you for listening.
thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rick Atherton. I'm here because I want to make sure the community and the board and town administration understands that you've been very good about making documents available for public review on the town's website. We're, I think, more transparent than virtually any town site I've ever visited online. And we've also been very good about taping and making available your meetings, many of our boards and commissions and committees. But recently, I'm not sure what, 3 or 4 weeks or a month or more ago, that's changed. And I haven't heard you address that at your board meetings. Maybe I missed it. I want to encourage you as soon as possible, I think, to resolve that. And it's a much restricted list. There are a lot of very important committee meetings that a lot of our citizens can't get to. They might be held during the afternoon or other times. They can't make evening meetings all the time. And I'm aware of a lot of people who do want to follow them by being able to watch the taped online, on-demand availability of those committee meetings. I don't know if it's a matter of money or your relationship with TV18, but I think we need to get on with it. Every meeting that's missed, the nuances of personal comments and expressions are no longer available. Minutes of committee meetings, as you know, are often very late. The minutes have to be maintained by citizen volunteers. It's not an easy job. And the videotapes of those meetings are the best record we have. So I would hope you'd address that and get back to where we were as soon as possible. Thank you.
Can we get an update on that next week?
Sure.
We did get a letter about it. I can't remember the details, but so that isn't a surprise. We know it, and I think there is work on it. But
Yeah, so we'll just get an update on it for next week. Okay. Are there any other public comments?
I'd like to make a quick one, please.
Please just state your name.
My name's Thomas Holt. I'd like to bring to the attention of the public a kind of a ruling, or not a ruling, but if we could have a greater discussion about micromobility and dockless bike program, or at least licensing. I know there's a lot of traffic issues that are going to be discussed this evening alone, and I'm hoping that we can put that on the agenda in the very near future. That's all I'd like to bring to attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add as well that for anyone, we did discuss the Chapter 91 license on October 2nd, and we discussed some points specific to the license that there was a complaint about, but as well some things in the future about what we might do in terms of tracking Chapter 91 license. So just to follow up on that comment.
Thank you. I don't believe that there's any new business. We'll move on to approval of minutes from July 25th, 2018.
I wasn't on the board.
I'll move approval.
Second?
All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries 4 with 1 abstention. Approval of payroll warrants and treasury warrants.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We do have a number of contracts. Are there questions? I think there was one notation on one.
There's a grant, there's a contract with DPW and Community Data Platforms, and the amount is $60,000. There is that is the contract, $60,000, but it is offset by a $60,000 grant from Remain. So maybe we should have had parentheses around that, but it's sort of, I don't know. There's a cost, but then there's a grant, so it's net zero.
Okay.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, we have a consent item, a gift from Human Services Salt Marsh Senior Center.
I make a motion to accept with a letter of thanks.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We have one public hearing. We're going to open this public hearing to receive citizen input on the select board's implementation of a paid parking system for the summer season 2020. This is something that stemmed out of a report that goes back to 2011. This has been being discussed before most of our time here. And we, in our strategic planning, with one of the number one things that continue to come to us are concerns about traffic and parking related issues. We started discussing it in 2017, finalized our strategic plan in 2018, and actually further revised it and reaffirmed it this year. And this was one of our goals, to try implementing a system like this. We do have a number of decision points that we would really like to hear from people on those choices and how the different ways of doing this might impact them.
Good evening, I'm Curtis Barnes. Thank you very much for having this public hearing. I only wish that you had had it a year or so ago before we got the reports and the recommendations, because then maybe you could have had some of our thoughts heard by then. I am not going to read my letter, since I have sent it to all of you or hand-delivered it. I have also, as you know, it's been published in the newspaper. But I did do something very radical. I went to Hyannis, and I took pictures at one of the parking lots of what they have, and there's two sets there to share. I wish I could have gotten them to you in email so you could project them, but in essence, in Hyannis, they enforce parking 24/7, 365. And one of the points that I'd like to make in this discussion, there is no free first hour. I do not think when you finalize your regulations, you should have a free first hour, because it'll lead to not being able to follow up and control it very much. My second highlight is, I think we've got to open the downtown lots, Washington Street in particular, hopefully the Wilkes Square lot by the High Line, so that we can get turnover and let people come in town and do their business, park, and they're going to pay for it. And finally, in order to make that work, we have got to get the shuttle system updated, activated. You've got to have remote lots, and you're going to have to run a shuttle every 15 or 20 minutes. I used to park at two fairgrounds, take the shuttle to the steamship, no problem in parking and blocking spots downtown. I don't know why that was discontinued, but I think it's very important. On the other hand, if you have remote lots and a regular shuttle and support wave that way, people will use a shuttle if they can get on it and come down every 10 or 15 minutes. They will not wait a half hour to an hour for it. And one suggestion that was made that I think is a very good one is if the shuttle looped into the NERDA lot, rather than trying to go all the way to the steamship. We've seen what happens on rainy days and the traffic backed up. It takes you a half hour to go a half mile. So looping into that lot from remote lots, in my opinion, would be one way that would be very helpful. So I encourage you to listen to the other comments. I hope that you will consider some of the points I tried to make. I've been researching this for over 2 years. And as I say, I wish we'd had this public hearing a year ago, and maybe we could have addressed some of them before it becomes a critical time to sign a contract for an RFP that was just issued. Thank you very much.
Hi. I want to thank Mr. Barnes because when I read his article, it made perfect sense.
Just state your name.
And I
State
really
your
like
name.
his idea to get rid of the valet parking. I think we're steering ourselves again to our summer visitors and forgetting about our residents.
Maria, could you just state your name for the record?
Want to say again?
Would you just state your name for the
Oh,
record?
Maria
Sorry.
Zodda, Z-O-D-D-A. The shuttle service to the outlying parking spaces makes perfect sense. I parked today at the town lot, and when I looked around, I realized that in 20 years that I've lived here, there's been no improvement there. And if you look at some of the shrubbery and the trees and the wood, I'm sure you could squeeze out at least 15 more parking places, pave it, put the lines in, and please put signage up to explain to people where they can and can't park. I got 10 tickets that added up to almost $200. And I was parking in a residential area, and I was told we have some 96-hour, you have to move your car every 4 days, like New York. And I think the town does a really poor job informing those of us who live here year-round where we can and can't park. So those are my comments. And take a look at that lot downtown. I don't think it takes a big engineer to figure out how we can squeeze out some more spaces. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael Kopko, 5 North Water Street. Thank you for having a public hearing on this issue. And like my friend Curtis, I wish we'd kind of had this conversation a while ago. As it is a public hearing and you're looking for public input, my first input is, will you please not do this? Just don't do it. You know, drop it now. And, you know, if we want to take it up another time, thank you. We'll take it up another time. But my first request to the town would be, please don't do this. It will affect our sense of place. It'll affect our doing business. It'll affect all kinds of things. So absent not doing it, I'd ask you, would you please defer action on it until I think more input has been given and more information has been taken, and the town is in, I think, a better position to implement a system like this, which in my opinion, we're not ready to implement this for summer of 2020. Absent putting it off or not doing it at all, I do have some comments. The system that's been described talks about using smartphones to pay for parking, something that I think a lot of us, if we've parked in Boston or New York, we know they have these smartphone-based parking systems and apps that you can get. But here, my concern is that there are citizens who are less tech savvy, less able to afford technology, who will not be able to avail themselves easily of an app on a smartphone, for example. There is some language in the packet today about computers and tablets being available at certain locations downtown that people can avail themselves of, which I'm assuming means they get out of their car, they go, oh no, I don't have a smartphone, I don't have an app, where do I go? There's a sign that says go to this store, and you walk in the store and they have a tablet. Well, I don't have a smartphone, so the tablet's not going to really be that easy for me to manage. It just seems like it's creating a big hassle for people, and frankly, a barrier to a lot of people to be able to use the system easily and effectively. And certainly, I would think that the town, one of the considerations the town has is making it as easy as possible to use. I think that's going to take a little bit of thought. On page 3 of in the packet, there's something about 4 days parking in the residential area, that you can pay a certain amount to park for up to 4 days in the residential zone. I think it's $47 or in the shoulder season, and $188 or something like that. Thank you, Erica. But it's up there somewhere. And I just want to get clarification. Does this mean that you can essentially pay $47 or whatever it is? There it is, the fourth one on the bottom, item May 2021. Thank you, Erica. That you can pay the $47 and park your car for 96 hours? Is that what it means? Or does anybody have an answer to that?
Right
question?
now, after September 30th, you can park your car there for 96 hours.
For $47.
Right now, you can do that
Right.
as long as you're not a commercial vehicle.
But it's a 2-hour, during the shoulder season.
During
Yeah,
the shoulder
but during
season.
this is,
Yeah.
so what season would this
So
be?
that is saying that you could do that in season.
In season, you could pay the fee, $188 or $47 in the residential area, and essentially rent an on-street parking space for 4 days.
That's one of the things. That
And
we're
that's going to free up that space. How? Okay. The logic of that escapes me. The logic of the whole October 1st through December 31st paying for parking escapes me, period. I mean, if you go out on a Tuesday in November downtown, there's no problem parking anywhere. I've lived on Nantucket for 42 years, lived downtown for 27 years. I've never once not been able to park my car. Never once. So I think we need to think about that. The enforcement procedure, I don't know if you guys have the stats on how many parking tickets get appealed and repealed during the course of a year. Having seen Dave's packet of repealed tickets from time to time, my sense is that a lot of these tickets get waived. Are we intending to outsource the enforcement process of this to someone? If so, what is the appeals process? Is it an in-person process like it is now? We go to 2FG and talk to Dave and say, this is what happened, and you make your case and it's up or down. Or is this going to be some firm somewhere or the state, or do we know who's going to be handling all that? The appeals process?
Should I answer?
Maybe the chief could answer that. I don't know that your sense is correct that a lot of tickets get waived, but the actual enforcement would be handled as it is now through the police department, and the ticket appeals would be handled in the same way, I believe.
By a local official on an afternoon.
Yes.
I'm Mike.
Hi, Chief.
The way the process would work is it would be simplified for the motorist in the sense that they can do an appeal online, but it's still a local hearing officer that looks at it, makes the decision. The individual, though, can upload photographs, any other evidence they have or anything right to their appeal online, and they wouldn't have to come to the police station to do that appeal. Right now, there's probably only about 1 or 2 tickets a week that actually get overturned. Mm-hmm. So you're not talking about a whole lot, but okay. One of the issues with the automated system is it gives us better tracking and data as to the reasons why something's getting overturned rather than just anecdotal data.
Okay, thanks, Chief. I was going to ask too about obviously the chief is going to be responsible for running this program and doing all the enforcement, and that we have some assurance from him that we're ready to start and he's ready. I mean, obviously there always a learning curve, but that he feels like we're ready to go with this.
Well, that's why we proposed a 2-step process here so that we could. I don't think we could do the entire program by next summer. I think we certainly can get started in the smaller and then expand into the bigger. It's more a matter of procurement rules that it will keep us from making that 2020 goal. Then anything else. But there's personnel that has to be acquired. There's equipment that has to be acquired. Contracts have to be signed. Things like that. So I think we can implement it. And in answer to your earlier question about the 96-hour rule, currently the way the law is, somebody can park in these spaces for up to 96 hours without paying anything. After that, they start getting ticketed for abandoning their vehicle or storing their vehicle on a public roadway. But what would happen with this proposal here, and of course it's subject to whatever the board wants to do, but assuming they left the 96-hour maximum parking time in place with the rates that were proposed by the work group, they would pay $188 during the summer season for leaving their car there that amount of time. Right. Like I said, right now they can do it for free.
In season? Somebody without a permit can do that?
You're talking about, it depends on where you're talking. Right. Downtown, they can't do it.
Right.
In the core area, but in a residential parking district, if they have a parking permit, they can leave it there for up to 96 hours. If they don't have a parking permit, then they can only leave it there for 2 hours, and then they start getting ticketed.
Right. And so this is essentially a way for them to pay for that space for 4 days and leave it there ahead of time.
It would essentially do that, but the instructions that we got and the goal from the group was to find to move the long-term parking out of the core area into the shoulder area. Where you have to provide a place for workers to be able to park. Now, whether 96 hours is the right number, I don't know. Maybe it's 8 hours, maybe it's 12 hours. Those are all things that can be decided as we go along. They don't need to be in place before we implement a parking program, simply because that's just a programming issue on the software that the parking coordinator can handle. What really matters for our purposes getting started is what type of system you want to have. Do you want a paid parking system? Do you want an app-based system? Do you want a kiosk-based system? Do you want a parking meter system? That's what matters. Once that decision's made, the rest of it comes along as you go.
Okay. Thanks, Chief.
Along those lines, when you started more stringently enforcing the 96 a few years ago, it was after a winter. How many cars did you guys pull off the street that had just been sitting for months?
There was a bunch. I don't remember the number.
It was like 10 or 15, I think.
It was more than that.
Yeah. It was a bunch of cars that had just parked. Some had been abandoned from the summer before. Yeah. And they were Orange Street and Fair Street. They were everywhere. Yeah, right. Indian Street. There was some that had sat there. We all saw them. So that was important.
Right. And the flexibility in the system is the board could say, well, in the summertime, we don't want anybody to be parked there more than 12 hours, say. Right. But in the wintertime, they can park there for 7 days, a week, 2 weeks, whatever, in certain areas. It can even be further defined down to certain specific areas so that, we can control it better.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. My understanding is that part of the proposal is that you can pay for up to 4 hours parking in a space that formerly would have been a 2-hour space or a 1-hour space. And I'm just curious how a car parking in a space for 4 hours rather than having to move after 1 or 2 hours frees up that parking space more. Obviously, mathematically, it frees up that parking space less. So if the goal is to free up more parking spaces, this is working against that outcome. The other thing I wanted to ask, well, also credit cards. There are people who don't have credit cards, who don't have, again, with the technology,
You can get a prepaid card.
You can get a
like a Charlie card.
Okay, for parking. So that adds another kind of step to that. Is this, and I guess the larger question is this particular plan and this phase part of an already sort of in the works larger, more comprehensive parking management program? Or is it, I mean, are we looking at what the next step is from this? Are we looking at a parking garage? Are we looking at more shuttles? Are we have those things been kind of worked into a comprehensive step-by-step thing? And the reason I ask that in particular is because my fear is that at some point we will make a grave mistake and construct a large parking structure on the waterfront downtown. And anyone who has studied that issue, and we've worked on that issue here in town, knows that the first thing you need to do to incentivize people to use a parking structure is to implement paid parking downtown on the street. So in the interest of transparency and where we're going with all of this, I'd just like to know from the town, from the board and the administration, is this part of a longer-term plan to move toward building a parking structure downtown?
I'll answer I'll take a crack at it. I would say this is a draft. That's why we're having a public hearing. I'd say probably 3/4 of it is probably things that are going to happen. I'd say a quarter of it, we're getting input to improve it. There are questions that the board has had and have been working on it with staff. And I would say the parking garage, unless we value parking, we will end up with a parking garage. Unless we do something like this, so that, unless we do this and value the on-street parking, we'll end up with a garage, because what else will we do? We're adding 300-400 cars a year, newly registered cars every year. Where do they go? We expanded on Sunset Hill last year because cars were parking there, long-term parking, because it wasn't in the district. So we've had to expand the district. And now we're seeing impacts around the corner from Sunset Hill. Private roads, people are putting signs up. So, this is do we have 100% the answer going, 5 years, 10 years in the future? No. I think what we're trying to do is figure out what is step one to gather data and start, doing it right, doing it in a way that values parking and, enables people to come downtown, enables people to work downtown and, and do it, and make the island work right now. Right now, I would argue we're at 110, 115% capacity on a Friday, Saturday night. I don't think that that's really potentially good for anybody. So so it's the first step in what will be probably a 5 or 10 year process.
Great, thank you. Thanks a lot for that, Matt. And thank you all for having this public hearing and hearing us out. I'm very gratified, and I think a lot of us probably are, to know that some of these things are still being decided, some of these actions are still being contemplated, and a lot of it isn't a done deal quite yet. So thank you for hearing us out on that.
I don't know if it might help for us to talk a little bit about some of the things that we maybe don't agree with in the recommendation, so that people can give input on that. I mean, we can do, I don't want to cut anybody off that's ready to speak, but.
Hi, I'm Mary Chalk, 7D Street, and I live in Nantucket year-round. I just brought the NERDA map here to show that for the western edge of town and out to Nantucket, out to the beach, there is no year-round NERDA service. We only have service 3 months in the summer. So we have no choice but to bring our car into town. So we're I think we're unfairly burdened by the paid parking. So I would ask that you not implement this until NERDA service is island-wide and out to Nantucket, or to exempt Nantucket from the paid parking during the months that we don't have the NERDA service.
That is one of our decision points as well, is when the parking goes back to being free, which may be before, most likely would be before that NERDA service stops.
We have NERDA service from Memorial Day until mid-September, and I think I read that the paid parking would be from May 1st to December 31st.
That's the
6
recommendation. That's one of our decision points. So that's really good input.
So we have an option only 3 months of that 8-month period. Okay, thank you.
Hi there, Joanne Scopin. I work downtown every day and have for 30 years. And everyone's saying, oh, we're going to have paid parking. And the way I've looked at it for years is you get your first hour free and then it's $25. We have paid parking now. And you have your 2 hours free if you're out of there, and then you get $25. And I think it's a matter of enforcement. And I'll admit, on rainy days, I park in the residential area, not in the town lot. And I know it's going to be $25. I used to park in the Valet lot, and it was $20 a day, and that was fair. I think if you enforce the parking more, it's rare to see a car with more than one ticket on Main Street. They don't go back. We have a 15-minute in front of the pharmacy, rarely ticketed. It's really hard for businesses downtown, like the pharmacy, like the bookstore, to do business because there's so much online business. We have to somehow get people to come into town. They won't come to town. But I think that it's a misnomer to say we're going to start paid parking because I feel like we've had it for years. And enforcement's the issue. If they went by every hour and ticketed, you'd get the turnover. No one's going to turn over now if it's only $5 to stay for 2 hours. Or I'm not going to leave as quickly. The people who park all day, who come to town to do a big shop in the clothing stores, they don't care how many tickets they get in the summer. They usually come after lunch. They stay for the afternoon. They don't care how many tickets they get. Keep the rate high and keep the spaces moving and keep the turnover going. Thanks.
Hi, Campbell Sutton, 15 Appleton Road. I've read through your thing. I'm not sure how I feel about paid parking and whether the $25 ticket, which I've gotten, obviously, is the same as paid parking. I had just a couple of points. One, I didn't see any mention about the disability parking spaces. And I did see a mention of kiosks or something of the sort, which made me think that maybe those should be close to the disability parking areas if you go with something like that. I heard from Chief Pittman something about the discussion is really about what type of payment program we're having, whether it's an app or something. I guess I would... If you can get a prepaid card, I was heartened to hear about that because I really, honestly, for a $2 or $10 time to park, meter parking, I really don't see why I should have to give over my credit card potentially to hacking for $10 in some town. I mean, when I go to Seattle, I don't even stay in Seattle anymore because for $2, I have to give them a lot of money. I have no idea where that information is going. So that's my own paranoid self. But if I can get a prepaid card, I'm thinking that I get it here, where you pick up licenses or something.
I think you can just do it online. That's my understanding.
Yeah. Okay.
She's going to do a credit card.
So I was thinking more about being able to go in and just
do with cash
or check or, I'm talking about locally, right? Because I'm a resident, my mom's a resident. I know that apps and everything are really good for the youth. Mom still drives. She doesn't app. And her favorite spots, she goes to Stop and Shop downtown. She does the post office and the library for those 30-minute stop-ins. Mm-hmm. But so I'm thinking more about her and maybe other people in that age group that aren't app connected, or maybe having their credit card carrying around isn't the best thing for them, and a prepaid card would be better. Yeah. So that was one point on the disability and the prepaid cards. The other is I just, as I read this, I do not see the goal being achieved. I don't know I read what the goal was, but for me as a resident, the goal is turnover. Opening up parking spots. It's not about how someone can come down and go to lunch for 4 hours for $15. That I mean, you can spend, 6 hours there for $35. That has taken up an entire parking space for 6 hours downtown. That means that everyone that didn't get downtown by 11 in the morning is going to be forced to find parking at one of these satellite locations that have yet to be identified. So it seems to me that really isn't creating a fair process for everyone, I think right now the 2 hours thing, yes, I get it. People roll forward to the open parking space in front of them so that their chalk line goes a little bit, so it looks like they're in a new spot. So I understand that, but I think underlying the whole thing is about freeing up parking, getting it so that more people, when they come down, are able to find a space. Right now, it would seem to me workers could, for 4 hours, park for $15 an hour and take up pretty much all the core district parking spaces, so that they can still park in front of their businesses for less than they would now. So anyway, that would be something that I would just, I think that I've heard that here already this evening, that, the idea is to try and figure out how to create flow and movement of cars, not just rolling forward. So that was another thing. And I think that was it. And I had a hard time with which thing would be better. I mean, to an extent, you think meters, because then it's right in front of you. You park, there it is. I know. The other thought I had was that in a lot of metered parking areas in other districts, they do Sundays are free. I don't know.
This
if
wasn't
that's
going to start until 1 o'clock on Sunday.
Yeah, I noticed that.
After the church services are all over.
Yeah, because I thought about that too, like the church. But anyway, so that's just a couple of thoughts. I've got to scoot to make dinner, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm leaving for any other reason.
In any of our discussions that we've really opted for the idea of meters within the Old Historic District because of the visuals. I think that the general discussion has been about this being an app with potential kiosks as backup for people who do not have smartphones, forget them at home, or don't want to use their credit card.
Right. And I understand that.
I'm just letting you know. In regard to the meters, I don't think any of us have been on the page of meters.
Okay. So then I was just a little distracted by it being mentioned. Okay, thank you.
Can I please clarify something?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, I can sort of see the confusion, but this isn't quite the page we should be looking at for the recommendation. What's shown here is recommendations from a 2011 study done by Nelson Nygaard. So when Campbell was just saying $15 for 4 hours, that was a recommendation out of a prior report. And the staff recommendation is in the, it's closer to it's like the second page, I think, of the
page 2 of this report.
Was more that there would be a first hour free, $3 per hour thereafter, a 4 hour maximum. And this is just a recommendation that we came up with after some discussion and looking at some other towns. We needed to have something for the board to react to, but it wasn't correct what was being looked at before.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I just went off by what was on the screen. On my paper, I have that it would be $9 for 4 hours.
That's into the recommendation.
Okay, so that was my other thing. There's just no meat to this. There's like no, okay, so if you don't follow this, what happens? And 4 hours is $9, not $12. So it's almost cheaper. So anyway, just something to think about.
I hear you. It is a little bit confusing, but what would happen after 4 hours is you would start getting fined. Okay. And there would be a higher fine than what there is now. But again, all that needs to be, those are some of the decision points that we're talking about.
Hello, Tim Graney, I'm in the parking business, so I know a little bit about the technology that we're talking about. Just to alleviate some of the concerns that I've heard, I do know that there are kiosks that exist. I don't know that, the town is looking at those technologies, but that do accept cash, and that you can pay by license plate, so that someone without a credit card or those types of concerns, depending on what machine you buy, you can get rid of some of those concerns with that. And then also those without a smartphone, typically the apps nowadays have a phone number and a call center where you can call a 1-800 number and pay right over the phone by a credit card. So, if someone isn't tech savvy and doesn't have a smartphone, that is something that they can use. As far as, in my experience with this parking, one question was asked, what about people with disabilities? One of the things that I've seen other municipalities do in this scenario is that as long as you have a handicap plate or a handicap placard, that you can park in any space for free, no charge, no fear of getting ticketed. So that's one way that they've overcome the challenges that people with disabilities will face getting to the kiosks or getting to the pay machines. One thing that was also brought up here in this conversation was, while I disagree about the valet parking, I do agree that in the Washington Street lot, that there is some opportunity there to look at that parking lot the way it's currently designed, redesign that, and to come up with some more spaces with that. And it's something that we actually do in our office all the time for businesses. It's not that expensive to get it done, to do a CAD drawing of the lot and lay it out in different formats and try to get different lot layouts to see if you're maximizing your space, which after looking at that lot and being in that lot all summer, I do think that there is opportunity to create more space in that lot. So we agree on that. We don't agree on the valet parking.
Just one little bit of history on that lot. We did have an extensive plan done a few years ago, and correct me if I'm saying the wrong thing about the Libby, but we had an extensive plan to redo that entire lot. And there was a pretty big public outcry about taking down some trees. So it was put on hold.
Stormwater. Yeah, and there were some stormwater issues, stormwater drainage issues. So that is a project that is in the design phase now. And before we get too far down, completely repaving and lining and all of that, there probably could be some more spots. However, the spots that are in there now, I don't want to get too sidetracked on the town lot, but they're not really compliant with the size of what spots are supposed to be. And we're about to use part of it for a project you're going to be talking about a little bit later in your agenda, the Harbor Master Building. So we don't really want to start, we don't want to do a new lot and then mess it up with the staging area for projects. But it is in the design phase to do something of a redo, but I don't think we're going to end up with tons more spots because of the configuration of the lot and the space sizing.
Also, the prices that we received to do the work 5 or 6 years ago were pretty high.
Yeah.
And we thought this, to get 15 spaces to spend $300,000 or $400,000, whatever it was, and it was really pretty crazy. So,
Madam Chair, members of the Select Board, I'm Lee Saperstein, and for the purposes of these comments, I'm Vice President of the Nantucket Civic League. At about the same time as the board embarked on strategic planning, independently, the Civic League also embarked on strategic planning. As a consequence of our look at parking, transportation, one set, environment, the second set, and population growth, third set, we came up with a number of conclusions for our strategic plan, which we have shared with the board. But because this is an open hearing, I thought it would be a good idea to get it on the record that the Civic League supports the development of demand-based paid parking. And with that, I turn to anybody else who wants to make a presentation.
I just have a question. You had a nice map up there that showed District 1 and District 2. and I've never seen that before, so I don't know where these streets are that I'm not allowed to park. Where could I find that information? Is that just, I didn't get the packet.
This is part of a.
So District 2 is the whole.
Yeah. That whole thing is in our packet online that you can take a look at. It's in our packet. It's part of the report.
Thomas Merida. Michael Kopko brought this up, and I brought it up the last time. 4 hours. Who says that if you're allowed to park for 4 hours, it creates turnover? Every document that you guys have put out for the last 6 months or whatever in regard to the parking, that's one of the highlights of your whole basis of creating paid parking is you can park for 4 hours, but we're going to have more turnover of spaces because you're going to pay for it. I really honestly would like to know where that information came from, because was it a consultant that we paid that came up with that said that? Because we're all real curious in regard. Libby mentioned the marine lot. We're going to lose spaces there for the staging. We're going to lose spaces because of the valet. So the Washington Street lot is pretty much going to be shot next year. Your map shows District 1 and District 2 with the 4-hour parking. Have you guys rescinded about the half-hour parking around the post office? Are we going to have that by chance?
Can I make a couple comments as you go?
That'd be great.
We haven't gotten to this discussion yet tonight, but okay. I don't think that we're heading in the direction of having any valet spaces in the town lot this coming year. Just number one. And number two, Matt and I had a discussion with a parking consultant over the phone on Monday to go over some of these recommendations. And Christy and Jason both were able to talk to him as well on a different date. And one of my takeaways from it was his recommendation was that the first 30 minutes in any space in town is a grace period. So for any of those errands, no matter where they are, when you're running in to get lunch, you're running in to get your prescription, you're running in to get your mail, you don't have to sign in. And that is just the recommendation that came out of that. That is a decision point for us. That makes sense to me.
I think that's great. That would be like, or even an hour would be great. But the problem is if you have 4-hour parking on Lower India Street, people are going to park for the 4 hours, and you're not going to get the turnover in the key area of the post office and the Athenaeum.
The other comments I would make, and anybody else can jump in, is the people who are going to pay to park for 4 hours are already parking for 4 hours or more in town, and they're either moving their car or they're just taking a ticket, most likely. Once you put a little bit of a value on the parking, people might start to think of alternatives when they can do an alternative. But then you can also, when you know that you have to be at your desk for 4 hours and you don't want to have to worry about moving your car, you can pay to have it there. But then on other days, maybe you say, hey, it's a beautiful day and I don't live too far. I could walk. I can get a carpool with somebody. I can get dropped off. But on the days you need your car, you can actually pay and sort of use a system that's not punitive. And I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but once you put the value on parking, the idea is that people will start to think about how they do things. But when they need to absolutely have their car, they have a mechanism to do that and not get out and drive around in circles moving it, because they actually do need to be there for longer. Or they might compact the amount of time that they spend in town because they're paying something for it. So.
Most of the high-end employees downtown on Main Street in that area, their cars are commercial vehicles that they're able to write off the expense for parking. So to them, it really won't matter. I cornered Matt in regard to the parking thing last week or whatever, and he, or a couple weeks ago, and it was basically enforcement. Everybody's talking about the enforcement. If you enforce it, people are going to move. Now, some people said that it was going to be $25. I believe in your packet you speak of raising the over the time parking to $50.
That's another
So that's a recommendation that you guys are thinking. So 25 to 50. So if you take that extra $25, because it's $185,000 you collected in overtime parking fees last year, I believe. So if you're going to double it, you estimate it's probably going to be the same. If you create the enforcement on it, you could go out and get 2 or 3 of the little ticket writing machines, get some wax pencils to mark the tires in the rain, and literally go around and enforce it. Hire 1 or 2 more parking people and just do a full enforcement for a year or 2. See how that works before you implement a full paid parking program. If you increase the fees to $50 from $25, you'll have a little more money coming in. That'll pay for the extra person, $15,000 per tablet unit. Boom, you've got it, enforce it, let it go for 2 years. We might not have to have paid parking. Part of the reason people like Nantucket is there is no paid parking. Everywhere else people go to as tourists, they have to pay to park. Bangor, Maine, that's what we're basing everything on. We're not Bangor, Maine, we're Nantucket. Nobody likes to pay. So they play the game of parking. If they want to pay the extra fee, they'll pay the extra fee. But otherwise, it should just stay the way it is. Then if you implement this parking here, pretty soon, are you going to start implementing it at jetties and Surfside to get more money? Because it's a stepping stone to go. So, and then, what was the other one? Yeah, that's it. I'll let that go. Thank you.
Tom.
Hi, Ginger Andrews, 1 Stone Alley. I think you just have no idea the Byzantine complexity with which those of us who actually have places to park on private property torture our schedules so that our friends can also work. So a lot of people are dependent on other people's driveways, whether they're away or they're not using their car or they don't drive anymore maybe. Because, yes, take the bus or ride your bike. Well, somebody who's working, who has to get dressed up for work, is not going to be able to shower and change their clothes when they get there. Somebody who has heavy stuff to carry, like at the Artists Association, if you're bringing your paintings in, those are not things you can transport on a bike. We changed our drop-off schedule so that we could make it possible for artists to have it's about 10 hours in which they could drop off their work instead of 10 to 6, which is a summer person's schedule. And so I don't have an answer for you, but I'm just saying that whatever you end up doing, whether it's a shuttle or buses or what have you, those buses have to adapt to the way people actually need to work. So if you need to get to the 6:30 boat, I used to work in the theater, I wouldn't get done sometimes until after midnight. The show would close, we'd load in the next thing we'd clean up. I lived in town, I could walk home, it was fine. Not everybody can do that. So a shuttle has to adapt to the hours in which people actually need to use it. And that's all I have to say.
Hi, Toby Brown. Excuse me, I don't have anything written down. But I'm glad we are having this public hearing, because years ago I asked a selectman at the time, now select board. So, and I asked him about the district parking, or whatever you call it, the one that they have they own 3 cars, but their driveway holds 2, but they are lucky to get a parking pass that puts them anywhere on the island within that district. And I've always thought that does not, I don't know how many there is out there, but that's a lot. And there's one place that really irks me. It's actually a customer of mine, and I'm not going to mention where it is, but it's across from the homestead.
Soon to be ex-customer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're away right now. So is right across from the homestead, and their property is on Main Street, but they got a beautiful driveway on one of the side streets. But sure enough, they got both cars right out on the road all summer, and I'm like, to me that's just disrespectful for one, but also back on another point regarding that, like if you rent a house and there's 2 parking spots, your landlord says you got 2 parking spots. That's it. There's no street parking. I don't know why they get to just kind of whatever. Oh, I'm on Main Street, but guess what? I feel like parking on Union Street for free. And so that would be. Yes.
Can I just comment on that? Because that's actually one of the things we have been discussing is making those more specific to your area. If you have a resident parking permit, that it's within your immediate vicinity.
So, but like if you do have a driveway, will we still be giving, if you buy a house that has 1 car can fit? I mean, it's just kind of the way it is. Don't get me wrong. I'm not into the banning cars issue, believe me. But if you buy a house and it fits 2 cars, kind of like a place where you can't build a pool because you don't have enough green space, are we going to give that person 2, 3 because he happens to have the money to buy if I could buy a beautifully historic home, I don't think I would care about having 5 cars if I was on, So that's one point. And the other point is I'm not against necessarily paid parking to a point. I actually think meters wouldn't be bad on Main Street. I'm saying a few spots like Main Street. I don't think we need to get into whole cores, but like the places where you're going and you're stopping. Main Street is a very busy place where people need to go. And I get not having that place jammed up. But if you want to say like historic, I don't think a blue bus that says the Wave is historic at all, or either iPhones or whatever. But I'm not against the necessary paid parking, but I agree with some of the other people. What they said was, are we really creating more parking? Or is it like a few weeks ago, I heard it sounded more like a revenue process. And I don't think we need to just be making more revenue to have projects that don't need to be done, where let's just, make more parking. We all ride around the island a lot trying to find parking, and it seems to work pretty decent for the most part, but I wouldn't be against some parking meters. Charleston has parking meters, and that's a beautiful city. I don't hear people complaining about that. But anyways, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Brooke Moore. The most interesting thing about this proposal to me is that we go from anecdotal to data. And everybody has a story to tell about their personal experience on parking. But if we implement this program, we will know. We will know how people are parking, how long they're parking, who they are. And we can tweak it to make the controls and the changes by neighborhood easily through the app and through the system. So that's why it really intrigues me, because right now we're all just telling our personal stories. So thanks.
And as Rick comes up, quick comment. Some of the recommendations are based on data from 8 or 9 years ago. They walked the core fully for 2 days. Every 1 hour, every half hour, every 2 hour was covered for the full length of the day. And they, from that, and I think it was like the 3rd week of August. So they have data for 2 days in that time frame. So that's what we have. That was formed the basis of some of the various recommendations from consultants.
Hi, my name's Rick Atherton. I'm sorry I stepped out for a while, so if I'm repetitive, I'll try and be quick. My experience with this, goes back a ways. We've all been through this at various times, the whole question of paid parking or not. I've always found it strange that the people who I think are expected to benefit from this exercise, if it goes through, are the downtown businesses. And if they really cared about this, they could have had their own solution at any time. They could ask their employees to park out of town and provide transportation. They have never done that. That's been an obviously available to them for 20 years. And there must be a reason why that, because they may not expect it's going to help revenues. It's just going to create problems. That's my observation. In terms of, I'm going to have a couple of other just observations, and I'll let you go. My own sense of the revenue side of this is parking fees are regressive. And if you want to raise money to do whatever you want to do with it, the tax base is progressive. And all you have to do is go to town meeting, say, I want to spend this kind of money on whatever the project is. And I think you have a much better distribution of the burden than you will get from parking fees. In terms of the comparisons to other towns, the last thing I think most of us want is to be like Hyannis. I mean, who are we kidding? We didn't come here for that. I think we came here for a lot of other reasons, and sort of the character of our downtown, the way it is, has worked just fine. Anecdotally, I talk to a lot of people, I'm sure you do. I haven't run into anybody, I mean, really anybody, I'm talking to the wrong people maybe, who really want to go to paid parking. They've all been able to find parking places downtown. They've worked the system well. They know how it works. I would ask you who you think is going to benefit from this change. You must have some impression of who benefits and who's not going to benefit from this change. And I think you need to share your impressions of who those people are. In terms of demand management on the fees, it reminds me of the airlines. I don't think anybody likes airline pricing. You want to buy a ticket, you get closer to fly time, it's triple the price or whatever. I mean, I gather what you want to be able to do is raise the price on parking, Friday nights at 5 o'clock before dinner time, or whatever the high demand segments are. I would just share with you that kind of pricing structure is not likely to sit well with the community and the citizens. Nobody likes that kind of management. Then I would go back and just relate in terms of my own time on the board. I remember when, I think it was the Park and Rec Commission wanted to raise more money, and they wanted to have parking fees implemented at Surfside Beach. I think the best thing we ever did was to say, no, thank you. And I think that's what I hope you do with this request as well. Simply, no, thank you. The investment in your time, the community's time, the effort, the money, I don't think are going to be well received, and you're better off to simply stop the process now. Thank you.
Christine Coletti. So many of my comments or thoughts have already been spoken, but I'm going to say some of them anyway. I just think this parking idea is a goal that you folks have, and sometimes goals can't be met or they have to be shifted. I think it's what we're planning is urbanization of Nantucket, and I am not for that at all. Downtown is living, breathing, active community members who go down there to shop, to socialize, to conduct their business. And I think it's going to be a detriment to the businesses down there. I did an informal look around, and I started from where the Nobby shop used to be and just kind of went up and down Main Street, up to the bank, and then coming back down, trying to get an idea of how many people actually work in the buildings. And probably about 75 to 100 people work there. And sometimes on Main Street, you see the same license plates all day long while they move from one spot to another spot. So, like Mr. Atherton said, the business association, maybe they could, well, I guess the town would have to do it, but have a shuttle, a little 15-minute shuttle, taking them to the jetties. People who work there know they have to not park their car on Main Street. Keep it open for business people, consumers or customers, and people who are conducting their life downtown. And there are also some people who, money is a problem. They don't have the extra $15 a week if they go downtown 3 times a week. That's $60 a month or more, depending on what. That's a big amount of money to a lot of people. I think we're thinking about people who are rich. Not everybody is rich. We have a food bank. We have a safe place. We have disenfranchised people here. And you're hitting them in the pocketbook for what? It just bothers me that downtown, for our community, you're taking from them instead of letting us be part of the community. I guess that's probably all I have to say. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Andy Lowell, 4 New Lane. I thought of two things, just 2 words on the way in here. I did not prepare a speech. I'll start with, I drive through town every day, sometimes 3 or 4, because I just like our town so much. And I have to agree with Mr. Kopko. Don't do it. I like that. But maybe I was just raised to be aware of my surroundings. I'm not sure, but I notice every day how many people take 2 parking places, and it really peeves me. There's signs that say no parking here to corner, and people are afraid to get within 5-6 feet of them. Even 2 feet, it's not acceptable. How do we solve this? I went through town, and literally there are 200 places where people can take 2 parking places. Look at the bottom of India. Every time you go by there, the very bottom of India Street at Southwater, people are 6 feet back from the crosswalk. It doesn't make sense to me. You want to free up some parking places? Enforce on the people who are taking 2. There's a silver Dodge pickup outside right now taking up 2 parking places. Start with that. I wrote down 2 words on my way in here: inconsiderate and disrespectful. Think of your community. Think of your other people. You're not the only person here, but we need to enforce the spaces that we have. And as far as a valet lot, I don't know who owns the big, huge circle at Brant Point, but it could hold 100 cars. It doesn't need to be paved. We don't need to plow up the sod. If Valet Park ran it, you'd park in one direction one day, the next day you park in the other direction. It could hold 100 cars in that circle. Problem solved. Thank you.
Hi, Suzette Brown. Are you planning to have the shuttle go everywhere on the island? A much better system, a much better schedule before this is implemented? I live in Pulpus. There's no way for me to get to work at time and get out on time and function like a normal human being. In the summer, when the parking has to be in the town lot, we park in the town lot and we walk. I don't want a ticket. I don't want to have to pay for parking, so I walk. That's where I have to go. To take it away from the people that are working in town, who have to work in town to live, is ridiculous. Can you tell me how much I'm paying a week to work 8 hours a day to park in town? How much it's going to cost me? Does anyone know?
That's one of the things we need to.
Well, I mean, that's
one
kind
of
of a big
one of the
deal.
decision points we're looking
One of
at.
the things that I saw, it came out to $400 a month, and I don't know about you, but that's a lot of money just so I can go to work. I don't want to go to work and spend $400 so I can put my car in a spot that's a half mile, quarter mile away from work that I'm walking because that's the rule and I'm a rule follower, so that's where I park. I don't park in a 2-hour spot and run out and move my car up a little bit. I don't do that. But now I'm penalized like I was all summer to get to town, to get to the lot half an hour before I have to be to work. Otherwise, all the spots are gone because the other half is taken up by valet, which I'm happy to hear that's not going to go in there, but then there's another stuff going in there. I get it, there's a parking issue, but there's certain people that can park certain areas and there's certain people that can't. And the people that are working, you can't charge them $400 to park. You're getting rid of half of the community that works in town. And if there's somebody that's going to be a waitress, they're not paying $400 unless their bosses start giving them more money. And who do you think's paying for that? We are. Because no one's going to be going out to dinner because it's going to cost 3 times the amount of money. I can't go out afford it now. So I'd love to know that there's a shuttle going to be able to come more than a couple hours all the way up to Pulpus. I know Nantucket has an issue, but Pulpus does as well. Thanks.
Hello, John McGarr, 63 Upper Vestal. First, I'd like to thank the board for your thoughtful consideration. This is obviously a problem. That's why we're here. Parking is certainly an issue. I was very happy to hear that a lot of my questions coming in here have already been addressed. I recently put a poll on the Facebook, the Nantucket Seasonal Year-Round community page. 94% of respondents, approximately, are against any sort of paid parking. So I think that I tagged most of you guys in there. Mr. Fee, couldn't find you on Facebook, so good for you.
Keep looking.
I wish we were all there. So I'm really happy that the efficiency of parking has come up. One thing I think that we could do as a suggestion would be to demarc all of the spots as individual spots, because there certainly are a lot that are taken up by one car. And then I think we could also look at the loading zones. There seems to be a serious redundancy in areas and how often those are actually used for deliveries. That should free up quite a bit of spots, as well as the town lot. So my other question really comes down to the economics of it. So am I correct in understanding that we collected about $180,000 in overtime parking?
Roughly, yes.
Okay. So what was the total cost for the summer specials, all of the enforcement, collections, everything else? Is that a break even, or did we lose money?
Break even.
Okay. So if we're going to bring in technology and outside purveyor and have another layer of complexity on this, what is sort of the net gain here? If we're looking at efficiency and you can park for up to 4 hours where currently you can only park for 2, I'm curious as to what the net gain, what our net gain is. And that doesn't necessarily.
Are you talking financial gain, or are you talking?
Well, financial and for overall efficiency and turning over parking spots and increasing the amount of business that happens downtown.
Right. If you get turnover, the idea of this of demand management is if you get turnover, the downtown will be more vibrant than it is now.
Of course, yes.
And that's the goal. And I had a business on Oak Street, which when the police and the police were downtown at the time, and the town building was downtown, there were more people then. But on a day that they ticketed and moved people along, I would do $1,000. On the day they didn't, in the middle of the winter, the days they didn't, we would do 200, 300.
Right.
So I gave up the business, and I'd go over and ask them to do it, but I gave up the business. I couldn't pay, my mortgage. I couldn't pay my rent on that property at the time. There's a lot we've heard actually from a couple different businesses who get it and who have said, hey, this is about time. The same people park in front of my business all day long, all from, pretty much almost all year.
Right.
So one of the things is to make, and how many Islanders do we all hear say, oh, no, I don't go downtown in the summer. I can't go down. It's too busy down there.
So do you get the sense that having to pay for parking would encourage them to come to town?
Well, I think if there's a place for them to park, and if they can come down for, an hour, hour and not pay anything, half hour not pay, hour, I think if it opens up, if this works, then 15% of the spaces are opened at any one time. So anyone that wants to come down at any one time can come down. That's sort of the idea of it. And it's not an entitlement where it's my space and I'm there forever. It's, I can go down and enjoy downtown again.
Sure.
And if I go out to dinner and I want to spend, I've got to spend $4, I can go to dinner and spend $4.
So in your business on Oak Street, how many hours a day were you receiving deliveries?
Back then?
Yeah. The reason why I ask it on Oak Street is because, for instance, there's a loading zone on Oak Street next to the T-shirt shop, and then right literally around the corner in front of the Dreamland is another loading zone. Right. And so that could potentially be, if we just cut that in half, because you're talking what, 8 or 10 steps for the delivery guy difference between those two buildings, that would free up another 3 spops.
Right, but we could go back and forth. The loading zones are a whole different issue. And if you took, we're having problems getting the trucks to park in the loading zones. So that's a whole nother issue that we're not discussing tonight.
Right.
And so so that's. that's a different thing. And if we free the spots up, that's great, but if the spots have the same people parking them for 6 or 8 hours a day.
Well, from what I'm looking at, they can park up to 4, whereas currently they would be a 1 or a half hour.
That's a decision point. I'm not I don't mean to be argumentative, but that's a decision.
No, I don't either. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we haven't made yet. So
sure. Okay, that's all. I would just like to ask that, sort of the efficiencies of downtown and the use of parking currently would be addressed. Thank you.
I did want to say one thing on a comment that came up earlier. I mean, I think that for this to work for the people who do work in town and live in outlying areas, we have to pair this with a direct shuttle, whether it's from here or whether we talk to the school about using one of their lots in the summertime. We have to have something that goes like every 10 minutes that brings people into town. And then on days where they absolutely need their car right there, they could pay to park, but for the most part, they have an option that is economically viable. And I think that would make a big difference.
Sarah McLean. So when, and I don't know the man that brought it up earlier, but basically raising the fines for overtime parking, and you just made a comment about people that said, we've got the same cars that are parked there all the time. Well, if all of a sudden it's a huge fine for over hour parking, whether it's a 2-hour limit and we keep everything the way that it is right now, but the fines actually are enforced and they're much higher, people would think about moving their car and taking it elsewhere. And that coupled with having, outlying areas for people that will park that need to be there all day long, it's a two-pronged approach, but at least you're addressing sort of a lot of the people that need to be there for 8 hours or more.
Phil Gallagher. I have a topic which I have spoken about to all of you, but you don't. I know that I'm going to speak to the rest of the people here because you don't believe me. You should never talk about parking without simultaneously talking about traffic and the changes that will occur in the traffic if you make changes in parking and vice versa. In this case, let me just pick a number, and any one of you can probably give me a better one. Say there's 500 cars that are in this area that we're going to be turning over, and every 2 hours. That means instead of bringing 500 cars downtown every day, we're going to be bringing 2,000 cars downtown every day. Wham, 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 in and out. Can you imagine what it's going to be like to move your automobile anywhere near the high school, anywhere near the Rotary? If you can increase the turnover in parking the way you think you're going to, bingo, you will think that this summer's traffic downtown and everywhere else on the island was nothing. Oh my God, could we please go back to the way it was in 2019? I will conclude with a topic that I think most of us like downtown Nantucket the way it is. I can't drive down there in the summer. I can frequently get into the post office to get my mail by driving around the post office 4 or 5 times. I hate to do that, but I can do it because I have to. But I don't like the fact that downtown traffic is so complex and that the parking is so overparked. But you must include the changes in traffic when you change parking. To think that they are independent of each other is about the stupidest thing I can possibly do, because any one of you, if you think about it at all, know that changing parking, and certainly changing the amount of parking, will change traffic, and not in ways that we are going to like.
And Michael, correct me on this, at any time downtown, what is it, like 40% of the cars driving around are looking for a spot, and some number like that. So the 30 or 40% of the traffic that we have downtown is looking for a spot. If we price this properly so that there's spots, we're dropping traffic downtown by 30 or 40%.
But you're still going to be bringing more
No.
cars down because the parking is there.
Understood,
And
but-
that means trying to get past the high school.
No, that's a different issue. That's similar. Traffic is an issue all over the island, Phil. But what I'm saying is people that do paid parking, places that adopt it, partly are adopting it because of the circling and looking for spaces, and it saves them a ton of traffic. So that there's a positive. It may be negatives, but it's positive sides to it too. That's the only point I'm making.
Yeah, I think, Phil, thank you for reminding me because, I think the board didn't set out on paid parking because we thought paid parking was what Nantucket needed. It was actually a traffic discussion. And every meeting we've been to, whether it's Civic League or a residents association, everyone on Nantucket agrees that traffic and cars are an issue. And I do feel our board, I think any board looking at this is a little bit snookered because when we look at a parking garage, everyone says that won't work. And we look at banning cars and everyone says that won't work. We all want fewer cars. We want a sense of place by having fewer cars. And this board has looked at paid parking as a possible solution to maintaining a sense of place, hopefully avoiding a parking garage, getting traffic moving in and out, but reducing the overall number of cars and increasing the incentive for people to park elsewhere. And I have to admit sometimes I'm more in the camp of more concerned about paid parking. I think everyone here tonight has brought up issues that I'm concerned about, from affordability to accessibility, cost, shuttles. They've all been named, and this board has thought about them in depth. But again, at some point, we can either keep pushing this down the line, or someone's going to have to try and figure out how we can reduce the number of car usage. And if we couple it with shuttles, and we put this in place, and we look at the data, as Brooke mentioned, we might have some answers, and this might not be the perfect solution. And I do have my concerns, but I don't think we know exactly what it will do for traffic. But I do believe this board's hope is that we are trying to reduce traffic and reduce car usage. And that has to do with sense of place, vibrant downtown, and ultimately sustainability. I'm very concerned that a lot of the alternatives to this that have come up this evening are talking about paving things over, whether it's a circle in Brant Point that's in a flood zone, compacting grass isn't a good idea, building for cars at a parking garage, or taking out buffer zones, even if the condition of the town pier parking lot isn't perfect, paving it all over and taking out any bit of buffer zone increases flooding, increases hard surfaces. So we can either look at possible solutions that have, to be honest, they're not a $20 million parking garage to try and do this. This is a lesser cost with potential revenue. Or we can build for cars. And I think we have a much better chance of losing our sense of place if we do that. So I just think, for me, again, when I just look at the paid parking, I don't want it. I don't want to pay. I want to go into town. The nature of my work doesn't really mean that I can go in on bike. But I think that we do have to address our traffic, and we have to address our cars. So I hear you, and you may be right, but I'm hoping you're not.
I think that's really important what Rita said, and I hope the board will take into consideration the fact that because there's an issue there, it doesn't necessarily mean that you gotta do something right now. No one is gonna think any less of anyone on this board if you decide just this isn't the time to take this step right now. No one will think any less of this board. In fact, I think a lot of us will think a lot more of you. So please don't just do something for the sake of doing something, because it looks to me like this isn't going to have the desired effect of freeing up more stuff and won't make us feel like we did something about it anyway. So keep the option open of not doing it, if you will.
Hello, my name's Eric McKechnie, and I have a business at Southwater, India, and Cambridge. Very intense area, a lot going on. I've watched the system for 25 years. I think the system, the way it is now, is working pretty well. I really do. Some of the things that were brought up, the selfishness of people taking up 2 parking spots. I mean, I sit in the back of my building because I live there too. And I see people park. I go, do you really need to park there? You know, there's 3 cars that could park where you just put in your car. Why don't you just move up? And then usually give me a dirty look and stay there. People come in my store, and I've got a lot of traffic in the type of store I have, and they will bring up traffic, but they never say to me, "Oh, I can't park. I can't find a place to park." They always seem to be able to find a place to park. And so I think the system is working right now. And these kids, believe me, I have to deal with the chalking. They're pretty good at it. And they can chalk a street in the space of a minute. You know, I watch them go up and down both sides of India, literally running, you know, from tire to tire. So that, I think, is going well. My other concern, and this is purely selfish, I live there. I don't have any parking at all. Where am I going to go? I'm in my middle 70s now. What are you going to tell me to park at the jetties? You know, it's a concern I have. I didn't get this packet. I didn't even know there was a packet, so I feel I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. Maybe you're addressing my concerns in there, but it is certainly a concern I have. Thank you.
Sorry, if I may have one more point. The topic of circling has come up quite a bit tonight, and I really don't think that that's going to change, whether it's paid 4-hour parking or paid 1-hour parking or anywhere in between. The people that need to be downtown for 8 or 10 hours a day are going to still need to be downtown for 8 or 10 hours a day. So I think if you extend it to 4 hours, it'll be less circling, in that they'll only have to move their car once versus 4 times in a 2-hour spot, if that makes sense. That's all. Thanks.
It's Lee again. This time I'm speaking for myself. What we're talking about here are only interim solutions. Because if we look at the disruptive nature of the technology that's coming, it could be entirely different. Instead of having City Bike, what happens if we have driverless city cars that will come to your house upon demand, take you to where you want to go, and then go park itself so it can be recharged? This is not something we're going to need to worry about now, but we need to keep in mind that we're talking about interim solutions that need to grow, and therefore what we do today, or what you do today, or this week or this month, is only part of a path to the future.
Stephen Cohen. I employ 6 people in town. I'm in there every day, more hours than I want to say out loud. And I'm not against paid parking, but I don't actually think it will cause a lot of people to move, because some people, for work purposes, will just take that penalty, and some people who are visiting here or live here couldn't care less what it costs. And so the real people that get hurt are, basically the employees that are working in town, because they can't necessarily afford to pay that. And those are mostly local people or lower wage people who are working in our shops. And, I love having my office in town. I love buying my lunch in town, getting my coffee in town, having a vibrant downtown. And I hope that, to the extent revenue is raised through charging for parking, if that's what happens, that options are created so that people who need to be in town for long periods of time, whether they want to come in to go shopping or because they work there or whatever, that those satellite options are created to help that. There should be something between, you have to take a bus and you can get really close but be in the outer links. And I think it was a really hard impact losing those spaces in the town parking lot. I think a lot of year-round people with jobs and businesses rely on being able to park in the town parking lot. If they get there at 7 in the morning, and losing that to the valet was really hard. I think the paid premium option should be for the premium parking, and that we should be looking for ways to make it easy for people to have businesses in town and have employees at those businesses, and for guests and customers to be able to come there. So hopefully we can have something between a bus and parking on Main Street as an option. Thank you.
Hello, Thomas Holt again. I just want to follow up on that and the whole micro mobility and dockless bike option, which could be a perfect kind of, middle ground between the NERDA and the parking issues that a lot of people are bringing up right now. I know for me personally, it's self-serving because it's a business I'm trying to start. It could also be, this is an idealistic comment, but it could be something that the town eventually one day could take over. And it's more about changing the culture of this island from being a let's use our cars to get places. The technology of bicycles is alleviating it's basically taking away a lot of the struggle that an old bike where you have to sweat through the summer and everything like that. If you get on a pedal assist bike that is approved by the town and the state and the country for that matter, you can get from your house in Pulpus into town in the middle of the summer without having to take a shower once you get to work or something along those lines. It's almost sweatless. I can't say it's totally free of sweat, but it is a viable option that could work hand in hand with the reduction of traffic and the issue of parking. Because if we change the culture from let's all use our cars to get downtown because it takes a half hour to go pick up lunch, if you have a pedal assist bike, you can get downtown and back to your house picking up that lunch in that same half hour. It's a quick, viable option. Again, that's kind of all I have to say. I didn't want to harp on it because there's bigger issues for right now, but I think it's something for the town to look at to kind of work, again, hand in hand with all these issues. Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? I kind of wanted to make a couple of comments on the decision points that were put forward and the recommendation.
Madam Chair, are we going to talk after you close the public hearing, or do you just want to do it all
I think we should keep
inside?
the public hearing
Okay.
open in case anybody has something that they want to say.
Perfect. 'Cause I was waiting, so I'll talk after you.
Oh, okay. Do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
I've been the only one talking.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
Sorry, let me just go back to. So the things that I jotted down is when I spoke to the parking consultant, the 30-minute grace period made a lot of sense to me in the fact that you wouldn't even need to bother with signing into the app until you could, or into a kiosk until you knew that you were going there to really stay, to go to lunch or do something that was going to take longer than a brief errand period. So I liked that, doing the 30 minutes free and allowing people to not sign in until their end of their 30 minutes, if that's what they choose. I don't agree with the
Can you you stick on the 30-minute for a second?
Yeah.
So people understand what he's talking about is 30 minutes anywhere. If it's a 1-hour zone or a 2-hour zone, the first 30 minutes are free. And there'll be 30-minute zones in some of the areas that we're used to now, next to the post office and the library and those places, and it's 30 minutes, and then you can't stay there any longer. So, so those spaces will be turned over every 30 minutes, and people can be there 30 minutes once, not 30 minutes, roll to another place for 30 minutes. So those spaces will turn over, and those will be designated that way. So anywhere that's a 30 minutes is a 30 minutes only. And anywhere that's an hour or 2 hours are an hour or 2 hours and then charging. So that was how he was explaining it. And so you're gaining a lot of 30-minute spaces. You're getting those turning over, which supposedly happens now, but you're gaining everywhere else can be 30 minutes as well.
So who's policing those 30 minutes? I mean, we can tell you that where we live.
You're not going to get picked up on the camera.
You got to go to the camera, to the mic, so people can hear you online.
I just said, nobody polices the 30 minutes.
So,
Curtis Barnes again. I mean, good idea, but who starts the clock on 30 minutes? If you don't sign in and you just go for 30 minutes and then you say you can't roll it and move to another spot for 30 minutes or start the 2 hours, my whole point is that the clock has to start when you pull into downtown, and you can't go from one spot on Main Street to Center Street and get it over again. So, okay for 30 minutes, but how do you know, how do you control, and when do you start the 31st minute? You've got to put that into it.
Yeah, Matt. I think it starts when the license plate reader reads your license plate. So the license plate reader reads your license plate, they walk back in the 30 minute and catch you, and they can, if you're in a 30 minute that doesn't charge, you can get ticketed. If you're in a 30 minute that charges and you haven't set in, you'll get ticketed. But if you've signed in and paid, you're going to start paying.
Well, with that in mind, then I am hoping and assuming you're going to get more CSOs or more monitors, so you will be going by the 30-minute spot every 30 minutes by definition.
Yes.
It's going to be tough.
We'll be getting vehicles.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting that when the consultants did this, they did it with 2 people for 8 hours. They covered every single spot the full amount of time. So these police aren't going to be able to do it with 2 people. They're going to take appreciably more because they're going to have to write tickets and stop. But it's going to make it more efficient. The chief will tell you that.
Well, let me follow up with what the chief said at the last meeting, which was if you have license plate readers and you had to take a picture of the valve stem and all that, I'm all for chalking and moving them around. Read it with your license plate reader, and by golly, if the chalk mark's there, give them the ticket right then and there. Just spit it right out electronically or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if I wasn't at the meetings with the consultant, but if what you're saying he said is contrary to what he's told me. You have to sign into the app or into a machine to get the whole system to start. The scanning doesn't work because we would have to have 20 people downtown with 30-minute spaces everywhere to cover everything, 20 enforcement officers, to make sure that we got by every car at least every 30 minutes. And the way the system works is you get there, you whether by app, by kiosk or whatever, you sign in, and then you automatically get 30 minutes free from the time you sign in going forward. And then it's after that 30 minutes expires that you're notified that your time's expired. You have to either buy time or you have to be gone from the space.
Well, that's not what he said to Matt and I the other day. Because I'm having a huge problem with the little errand stops where people just need to drive into town and run into the post office or run into the pharmacy. They're going to choose to not go into town. I am really worried about that factor.
Well, I think that's a consideration.
We have to have something where you do not have to sign into the app to do those really quick errands.
You really can't. You've
Because
got to have one
by the
or
time
other.
you go to, if it's someone who doesn't have a smartphone, by the time you go to a kiosk, you've eaten up your half hour potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why he said and I didn't recall the still having 30-minute spaces. I thought that they were all the same but everywhere you've got a 30-minute period. But if you knew you were going to be there for 30, you might as well sign in right away. You'd still get the 30 free. It's when you're not going to stay.
No, he was saying that what he was saying is the way to designate, because people feel very strongly about the spaces near the library, in front of the pharmacy, places like that. So he was saying the way to do that is keep it simple. Have two different things. One's 30 and you can only stay 30, and the rest are an hour or 2 hours. And don't get into, well, here you can do this, and here you can do that, and here you can do something else. He understands the difficulty of, sort of enforcing, and the problem we had with Omni Park, and you're in this area now, you have to do this, and you're in this area, you got to do this. He's saying make it simple and have one way of doing it. So.
Does anybody else have a comment on the 30 minutes?
Your mic isn't working, so we could borrow Jason.
Share again.
Sorry, it was a question for Chief, or maybe, I don't know, Libby, but that was one of my concerns, is just if someone needs to park up on Center Street and the kiosk, say later in the evening, is far away, and someone happens to drive by, a license reader happens to drive by in that 10, 15 minutes it takes them to get from A to B. And I think that one is, for some people that's just a timing issue. They're going to get a ticket. But for some people with accessibility issues, going that distance is actually quite a ways. So wondering what happens in that scenario where in 15 minutes or 10 minutes someone gets a ticket. Or I know we've talked a bit about kiosk placement. That's just a concern generally.
That's actually, in the communities that I talk to, that's actually one of the number one reasons for appeals, is somebody got caught in that little window between when they parked and when they actually got signed in to the machines. Now, in the communities we're talking about, the machines were less than 100 yards down the road, so they didn't have to walk halfway across town, because most of these towns, Bar Harbor, for instance, and Hyannis, another, they've got kiosk every 100 yards or so along the roadway. So we would have that problem. The individual would have to prove somehow that they hadn't, or they just pulled up there. Maybe there's some way they can, some evidence they have, but absent any kind of evidence, the hearing officer probably would be inclined to just think they were just skipping the payment unless they got caught. So.
Or something, oh, sorry.
I was on the call with Jason, correct me if you heard it differently, but I understood that you would scan a car and then it's the next scan where the implementation happens. So if you parked at 11 o'clock and maybe it took you to 11:15 to put your system, or you got scanned at 11:15, but you didn't put your system in yet, you wouldn't get a ticket, right, in that 15 minutes. It's when they come back around at 11:45. If your information wasn't in the system. So you actually kind of have a 45-minute period or so, or depending on how often, right?
That's how it was explained.
So it's the
too.
second scan.
And
That's the enforcement.
You'd asked me after the last discussion how we could do these 15-minute things. And one of the things we found out, so I checked with the other communities, how they do it. And the problem with having the scan, you got to remember, if you need to scan those cars every 30 minutes, you got to staff it to be able to scan them every 30 minutes, which means in Nantucket, every street would probably have to have its own enforcement officer assigned to it to be able to ensure, because it's not quick scanning with these LPRs. It's just so many steps to go through. And then if you add into that in the middle of it, say you do your first scan, and then as you're going through the day, now you're scanning, and you're not just chalking, you're also now writing tickets to some cars that are in violation. So that even takes up more time. So you've got to, I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I think we had estimated we could do the downtown area with one shift with 4 people with LPRs, assuming the program that we had suggested. If you change that to 30 minutes, and that was assuming everybody could get by every space in their assigned area once an hour. If you say now 30 minutes, now you're going to have to double that number to 8 people to ensure that. But
he's not saying 30 minutes. He's saying you'd still hit the 1 hour in an hour, And as you walked from Main Street to Federal Street, or Main Street, to Broad Street, you'd walk through and you'd hit the 30-minute, and you go to Main Street and hit the hours. You'd walk back through and hit the 30.
Well, they're all 30 minutes. The way I heard.
Well, what he's saying is that the first 30 minutes anywhere is free.
Well, but
you don't have to scan. But he's saying you don't have to scan it for that.
Well, I don't know how you do that. How do I train? How do I train a summer special kid that's here for 1 week to do that? That's not possible.
Well, we need to be on the. I think we.
The point is, it's what Christy said, is when you get, like, if you're just running into the post office, you're fine. You don't have to actually sign in.
Well, no, that's why you do have to sign in.
There's no way you would get a ticket.
You would get a ticket.
How?
Because when the guy goes by and scans, all it says is this person hasn't paid. Okay? And that's all that officer then knows. This person has not paid. So now the person's not there. So the officer either has to wait there by the car for 30 minutes to see if the person comes out, or they write the ticket for not paying for the parking, and they move on. How's that any different than somebody that once the 4 hours expires and they go by and they scan it and it says that person's not paid to be here right now? That's all it tells them. It doesn't tell them that they've been there in that spot for the last 6 hours or 8 hours. It just says they're not paid.
I thought it was the second scan where they got the ticket.
Well, now you're doubling the workload. You're doing you're making what was a tedious deal with 1 hour. Now you're saying you got to do it every 30 minutes. You're doubling the workload.
But if someone parks on minute 1 and doesn't have a smartphone, they've got to go to a kiosk.
Right.
So they're going to get a ticket because they haven't paid.
Well,
in that time
they would,
period.
and then they could.
Yeah, that's going to be a major problem.
But that's not how it works. I think what has to happen is, I think there needs to be another discussion with with Jason, parking Jason, not this Jason. There needs to be another discussion and with the chief and with him to make sure, I think he's looking at it from one perspective. I think you're looking at it from another perspective.
Well,
I understand
yeah.
from the people you've talked to and from how you view
I've
it.
talked to Jason too.
No, I understand. And so I think we need to talk to Jason
Yeah.
because I think he's assuming that Jason Schreiber. Yeah, parking Jason. Yeah. And so I think, and the equipment, he said, is way better than it was 8 years ago. That it can scan and it scans and stores and acknowledges right away.
That is absolute horse hockey.
Well,
so
that's what we have to solve.
We had the latest and greatest technology here. Just Deputy, maybe 2 months ago, and it was absolutely like a dial-up internet connection compared to doing it with chalk and paper in terms of speed and complexity. And as I said, we're taking people now who are seasonal workers that are here for 1 week of training, and we're giving them a really highly complex piece of equipment saying, you're going to have to go out and do this. It could be done, but it isn't going to be quick. And, by the time somebody gets proficient at it, the end of the season, they're gone. And then next year we'll be going through it with another dozen people, training them how to do it. And so that's why we're trying to keep it as simple as we can. And I've talked to Jason and other consultants, and they always tell us how bright the sun is shining. And when we get the equipment, we find out it's a cloudy, rainy day every time. And we keep hearing it's because you guys don't want it. And that's not the case. The consultants themselves come down here. This guy was down here, and Mike Burns, I think, even confirmed what I said last time, that he himself witnessed it, the latest and greatest LPR scanners. It was a neat piece of equipment, really told you a lot, but it was really a tank when it came to, timing and doing this stuff. That's what we got to work with. So we got to be careful how we got to set the plan so that it's something that's doable, not something that's pie in the sky and some consultant sitting in Boston's great idea. It's something that will actually work here. And if he thinks it'll work, I'd be happy if he would come here, take the equipment, and show us how to work it, because obviously the guys bringing it here don't know how to do it and showing it to us.
Right. Well, and that's the point. That's my point, is that we have to, that has to be sorted to begin with.
One of the questions or one of the decision points is the timing of that grace period. If the grace period was an hour instead of 30 minutes, would that make it more feasible?
Well, that would fit with the proposal we put forward because we staffed it based on a 1 hour pass.
Could you have a select few 30 minutes around the post office if it was an hour?
Well, we'd probably have to, we'd have to look at that. I don't know how, it's off the top of my head. I'm guessing it would probably increase the staff level load, what we would need.
And if you had to sign in from the start, I prefer what I think Dawn, sort of what you were talking about and understanding is you had the first half hour, you didn't have to sign in so that people could pop in. But if you did have to sign in immediately and you went down to the kiosk and it took you 50, you would have a timestamp. So that would be your appeals process, essentially, is that you have a timestamp from when
you use a kiosk or you use an app, you have a timestamp on it. So that's what tells
you. That would be the proof for the appeals process.
But if somebody if somebody signs in or they go to the kiosk or they go to one of the remote stations at any location where it could be, like some people might have an iPad or something like that, they wouldn't be getting a ticket after 30 or during that 30 minutes because when the officer scanned it, it would say they're within their grace period. That's how that system works. It tells the officer what the status of that plate is at that time.
So I guess the one, and maybe this happens rarely, I guess the one thing that we're concerned is that someone gets out of their car on Center Street, the kiosk is far away, it takes them 10 minutes to get to a kiosk, someone swings by, stamps they haven't paid, now they are getting a fine there and then. And their appeals then would be...
I think reasonably, let's say somebody pulled up in front of the post office and they ran in there, and in the summer the line can be long. I think realistically, if they got a ticket during that 30-minute window, or they were going to a kiosk or something, and there was a 5 or 10 minute gap between the time that they got the ticket and when that was paid, I think the hearing officers would be pretty lenient about that. They're just looking for reasonable excuses to dismiss them. Mm-hmm. But when somebody comes in and what I can assure you, you operate under the pretense that everybody is going to do the right thing. And my pretense and experience is most people are going to try to game it. And that's what the game will be out there is how do we catch the gamers if you don't have to sign in? If you have to sign in when you park, then there's just a few people we have to deal with on an appeal. If you do it without signing in and there has to be 2 scans before we can issue a ticket, then we're going to have a lot of appeals that we're going to have to deal with, I think, on that.
So that's going to continue to be an issue for me on how we're going to implement this is those people running the really quick errands in town that are necessary. If we can't do it the way it was suggested, I think then we continue to have, I don't know, a dozen 15-minute spaces around town that are not even monitored by this. But that's my thought on that. I have others, but
if I can just throw in there, I asked that question specifically, Chief, and Deputy was in the room, and I said it's problematic for me to think that if you're just running in somewhere that you have to sign up, especially if you haven't done it before, and put a credit card in. You're just not going to come down and get coffee. You're not going to go to Limit Press. You're not going to go. You just let your mail pile up, right? It's going to hurt things. I specifically asked, can you come in for 30 minutes and not sign in? And if you're out for 30, 45 minutes, you're okay. But if you forget, right, you start talking to somebody in the corner, you're going to get dinged $50. And that's what Christy and I were told that's been done other places. The technology is there. So that made me feel more comfortable of going forward with something like a 1 hour, right? And then if we have to add another CSO or 2 in for the 30 minutes and 15 minutes or whatever, then that made sense to me. So I think that's where we're coming from, Chief, because that's kind of what we were told recently. Because I specifically asked that question. That was the answer we got, right, Christy? Right. That made me feel a little more comfortable. If I could say a couple more things on, I think Mr. Kopko brought it up right in the beginning. For me, if this was just a one-off and then we were going to go back to talking about everything else we did, I wouldn't be for this. This is part of a bigger plan, and not all of it's written, but there has to be shuttle buses, and there has to be more spaces where people can park and take a shuttle bus in, or take an electric bike, or something that's already paved. But I think Rita really hit the point of we're looking at traffic and trying to incentivize people, not everybody, but people who can, to take different forms of transportation into town. And one of the byproducts, this isn't why we're doing this, but one of the byproducts is that there will be extra revenue to support shuttle services and the next idea that John comes up with, or the next idea that we have, whether it's electric bikes or whatever it may be. So that's kind of the side benefit, but we're never going to make a ton of money and be like, what are we going to do with all this cash? It's going to go right into the parking district for sidewalks. But this all ties into better, safer sidewalks, better infrastructure, whether it's Pleasant Street. The more we improve Pleasant Street and Williams Lane and Sparks, people can park and walk in, but not if it's not safe. But not everybody can bike, and not everybody can walk in. So if this is not part of a bigger, I don't want to say a master plan, but this is just the first step to incentivize some of us to not, drive and park right in front of the coffee shop that you work at, and take other means. Not everybody can do that. I just kind of wanted to give that my 2 cents on there. The other thing you said, Mr. Kopko, about creating barriers, I've been very weary of that. Christy and I have this conversation all the time. Are we hurting the marginalized kind of groups of our island? And one person said to me, well, they're not coming downtown anyway. And I said, well, hold on, you don't know that. So I'm trying to think of who this is going to hurt and who this is going to help. And I also have in a business downtown where I need volume. My average ticket's $5. I sell $4 coffee. I need lots of people coming through, and so I want the turnover. And so I would want this to designed for turnover, but to design it in the middle ground where it doesn't hurt people who can't afford it, but not make it too cheap, too low to where people are just going to sit there all day. And there's got to be a funny middle ground, and we're going to start somewhere. I said this back in October, and we're going to tweak it as we go, and it's going to get better, and we're going to keep having public hearings and keep talking about it if we end up going forward with this. And it's not just a done deal and not pay attention to it anymore. So I really wanted to listen to everybody before I made any comments. That's why I've been quiet so far. Those are a couple of my quick thoughts.
I'll say one more thing. When the chief was talking about the 4 officers, 8 hours a day, 32 hours a day, and then all the appeals, when you do your exercise of figuring out whether this is going to work, make sure you do expenses versus revenue, because that's a lot of money for humans to be doing what they're needing to be doing. They get paid and maybe benefits, I don't know, with the town, but is the revenue going to be more than the expenses?
Sorry, I'll be real quick. Throughout this, I didn't even think of all this, but I think now just listening to all this kiosks or computers, iPads, this, what happened to the quaintness of Nantucket? I'm not one of these people, trust me, I'm not from Nantucket and I'm pro-growth and I'm this and that and whatever, but, I'm looking at everybody that says, I see bumper stickers, it used to be nicer in Nantucket and whatever, but now we're turning into, okay, Grandma, do you got your smartphone on you? And Grandpa, and it brings me back to the movie One Crazy Summer when I'm watching that, and it's like, that's kind of what Nantucket really was, is when I first got here, that kind of thing. And so, and all I'm saying is, like, I just think this kiosk thing is like the iPhone. Like, for instance, the other night I got a ticket, left my commercial vehicle overnight. It didn't have a sign that said commercial vehicles, whatever, but I don't have time to go in on Wednesday between 12 and 1. I'm just going to pay the ticket. So let's just say all of a sudden technology just breaks down for a day or whatever. But I just think, once again, I'm not against a little bit of paid parking here and there, but I just feel like this technology thing is just going to be a big disaster. Most I know myself, I can barely sometimes get into my iPhone and look at the 70-year-old lady or man, or no offense to any of the, but you know what I mean. And I'm 50 now, so but I can barely do it either.
So they're
but,
close to your age. It's okay.
Yeah. So, but that's all. I think it's like let's start getting, you know. And in terms of Jason's point about sidewalks, I mean, really, do you really think we need paid parking to build a sidewalk? Like, this town generates some money and they like to spend money, and I don't think we need paid parking to build a sidewalk. I really think that you bring it to a town meeting, like I'd be the first one to vote for an override for a sidewalk up Pleasant Street between Five Corners and whatever, that little spot that's dangerous. So I don't think money is an issue here. I think it's, you know, it's just, I don't know. I agree with Mr. Kopko that you don't have to do anything tonight or tomorrow or even this year. So thank you.
Toby, I was just using that as an example for infrastructure. Yeah.
A couple of other things that I wanted to say were, in terms of technology, I like the idea of the app, but I think that it's really necessary to have a number of pay stations as well for people as an alternative. So I think we would have to do both. I am concerned that if we implement this in the core and we don't implement it in the 2-hour zone, it's going to create additional problems that I feel like we need to be completely ready to implement it all at once, and have it all worked out and have the equipment in place and make sure that it works in the way that we think that it's going to work. And I think that we have to have direct shuttle service in place as well for this to all be able to function. It can't be a shuttle that can take 45 minutes for somebody to get into town.
I completely agree. So talking with different businesses, paid parking is kind of something that they all have been in agreement on. And I think this was said before, but you know, businesses really want this, but it's the employees that are going to be hurt. And so we really need to find a way to help those employees get to town. And like you said, providing an option for them to park all day if they need to, but also trying to create some satellite lots. I think having, did it come up in discussion with you, Jason, about having a bus that went the route similar to Cisco. So it wasn't going down Washington Street, having something that was really quick and easy to get in and out of town. Just something that we definitely need to focus on that as we're looking at this.
Yeah, I made a few comments, and so anyway, I just think I won't go over some of the ones that I think you've already said. I think the area, if we did just the small core, I think it should be slightly larger. There's a couple streets should get picked up. We need to solve the license plate reader. I mean, that one I think needs to be solved number one before any of this. And so we've got to turn our focus onto that to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we've got the right technology doing this. I think if we're doing a core and another core, I think we need to have the same technology doing, same license plate readers reading the interior core and the outer core and the parking lots, even if we're not charging those to start, so that we gather the data so we know what's happening. I mean, one of the deals is as soon as day one, you're gathering data, what the consultant said is week one, you're analyzing data. And so, we want to make sure that we're doing it properly. You see, I'm just second what Don said about there needs to be stations downtown. So if people don't have a smartphone, I think it should be in the visitor center or in different areas downtown where you can do it. Some of the positives of this, it would remove signage. There's a lot of 1 hour, 20-minute signs that would be going, a lot of those would be going away. Right now we've got a very punitive system where, it's all done by, if you don't do it, you're going to get ticketed. Ideally, if you do this, it's not punitive. You get ticketed if you overstay in the 30s, but the others you're paying more. And so it's sort of a whole different mindset shifts. Right now, everyone's trying to game the system and not get caught and not get caught. This turns it into a different mindset. and so, you know, and I said earlier, too many people don't come at all. What else? Let's see. Yeah, we have businesses that are supporting it. Typically, they don't. Most of the cases, the businesses don't support this for the first year or so, and then once they realize how much better it is, they wholeheartedly support it. A lot of the residents don't support it at first. When you read, I've read a lot about this for 15 years. You know, and everything I read, the residents don't support it. They don't like change. The businesses don't support it. Everybody's against it. And 2 or 3 years later, everyone can't imagine why they didn't do it earlier. You know, very rarely, if you do it properly, does it go in and come out. If you do it improperly, it'll go in, or if you don't, you know, it'll go in and it'll come out, and things happen. But if we do this right, it will go in and we will embrace it. And so I look at that. And then, you know, one of the things we have to sort out is what is the demand in the neighborhoods by the residents. You know, one of the segment that we've talked about, but I don't think we've really figured out yet, is that, and it shouldn't be for them to move out of their driveway so their friend can park there, or, you know, they shouldn't be taking up the street and leaving their driveway empty. You know, so we've got to figure out what is the right balance for that. But they also shouldn't be in the situation where they know if they leave the street in front of their house, they won't be able to get the car back until 11 at night. You know, that's unfair too. I mean, there's people that live in these areas, then they know that they can't move their car because, you know, they've got a resident sticker, they don't have a place to park, they don't have a driveway, some of them, and they move, they can't get back in until 8 hours later. So we have to figure out what is the balance, and the same principles would apply to that, and we'd have to be willing to say how many of these can we have? How many in these areas? And so that's sort of a whole nother angle. We're not on that yet, but that has to be taken into this. I don't think it's quite taken into consideration yet. And so, you know, and I think, you know, the other thing is just keep it simple. Whatever we do has to be very simple so everyone can understand it. The other thing that really hit me was how much, you know, when it starts, there's going to have to be a lot of teaching and a lot of education, and it's going to, you know, I think Janet Schulte in our meeting said it was going to be all hands on deck. It's going to have to be all hands on deck to actually, for the first month and a half. And, you know, what the consultant said is, you know, you forgive people their first ticket. You know, you're teaching them something new, you forgive them the first one, no questions asked. But then but you've got them in the system, they come back for the second and third, then you say, okay, wait a minute. You know, we forgave you the first one, we've shown you how to do this, here's how it is, and you do it. So there's a lot of things like that it's not just the equipment, there's a lot of operational issues that have to be done. And then the other thing is I really, you know, and I've said this to the board before, I think that we need a parking commission. We need 3 or 4 staff and 4 or 5 individuals, different stakeholders, business owner, resident from downtown, that are working on this on a, you know, at the beginning on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, because there's going to be too many things at a busy time of year to expect the police or Libby or this board to be able to sort all that out. There needs to be a set of people who spend a couple hours a week really looking at this. And that includes having somebody from day one who's assigned to this and running this. And we asked Parking Jason, how long it was going to take, and he said it was going to be about a 20-hour, but it could be more at the beginning position from day one. So there has to be someone set up day one, 20 hours minimum. So I just think those are the issues that we need to make sure we have in place, you know, this summer or next summer. When this happens, we need to make sure the operational stuff has really been drilled down into.
Any other comments for tonight?
My question is about the hours, the 8 to 11. The 11 p.m. Why so late? That was part of the recommendation, so I don't know, Libby, if that's something.
I think we talked to some other towns about that. Tonight we heard it should be 24 hours.
Yeah, that's correct. As a matter of fact, Hyannis, it says 24 hours in their signs. It's not 24 hours in reality. They only have staff on duty during certain times. And we were looking at when is the peak. We looked at, basically there's a graph that shows the peak usage of the parking, and that's when we pick those hours. That could be refined. It could be adjusted either way. Depends, if it's going to be more like right now, we have one shift, well, 1.5, that kind of covers it. We would have to have 2 shifts if we had that 8 to 11 schedule.
Okay.
And what parking Jason said is, it might be looking at the numbers that we had from, when he was here, it could be starting at maybe 10 and ending at maybe 10 or 11. It might not have to go 8 to 11. He was saying, 10 o'clock probably would be starting, and then go based on our demand. And then if the demand of the morning increases, you increase it. But you start out based on what, and a lot of this, it should be based on, the actual data and the demand that's happening. That drives how you enforce it.
Right.
I guess the other question is, how does the board feel about the time of year?
I really appreciated the comment about Nantucket. I think that we do need to consider the NERDA bus lines when we're putting in the timing. Something that I'll call him Parking Jason too, had mentioned is that you can also have different times of year where it's like Monday through Friday could be unpaid in the off season and then still paid on Saturday, Sunday for like September and October. So that's the part of this is that it is demand management. We could adjust.
Yeah, I would tend to agree that at least at the start, I think looking at the season in relation to the bus routes would be important. And maybe considering some of the tweaking, but I do think the comment about someone who works in town, that Monday to Friday paid in a shoulder season or an off season is still going to impact them. But I think reducing it a little bit at the start at least would make sense to align with the bus routes. Particularly if we don't have additional routes or shuttles set up in time.
Yeah, we should align it with the bus routes, but I think, having tried to run a business in the winter, when people don't move at all, it doesn't work. And so, and I sort of shame some of my friends who work downtown and park in front of their businesses and have shamed them into parking in the 2-hour zones, and it works. If people would just think of other people, like Andy Lowe was saying earlier, and would just park in the 2-hour zones, we wouldn't have to have enforcement in the winter. But the problem is people don't think about themselves first, and they park right in the core all day long when they know there's no enforcement. And the first day in the spring when I drive through and go, geez, there's a lot of people, not very many people parked on Main Street, invariably it's the day that the police start enforcing again. The Main Street just clears right out. And so it really, I think, we have to figure out, you have to figure out how do you get people to think of other people, and how do you incentivize people to move into the areas that they can move into to respect, so they walk 1 block or 2 blocks, then we wouldn't have to enforce it all. But if they park right there, then I think you do need to enforce through the winter, because the idea is that people can come and go and use the downtown. So.
And I think Curtis made a good point in his letter about trying to address the AMP parking lot because there's just not enough turnover there.
And the goal of this is the most convenient should be the most expensive, and the less convenient should be less expensive. And so you can't make the most convenient free and then expect people are going to pay to walk 3 blocks. So there are sort of policy, there's goals of how you do this, and we have to sort that.
I think maybe we can wrap this up for tonight. We've got a few more things on the agenda.
Yeah, just one other concern I had kind of reading through everything and some of the suggestions was just something to think about is how do we kind of prevent overnight parking, or is that something that we're not concerned about, but just to kind of float around?
I mean, right now we don't allow commercial vehicles to park overnight. I mean, I kind of hate to penalize someone who does the right thing and doesn't drive their car home if they've been out having drinks. But you don't want the whole downtown full of cars overnight or parking for multiple nights.
Yeah.
But I kind of like that there's no enforcement between, say, 11 and 8, where if someone did leave their car, they wouldn't be in trouble for it.
Yeah.
because I hate to incentivize people to make a bad decision.
And what I'll say, and I'm up, driving through town sometimes at those weird hours because of my job. And what I'll say is there's nobody, 2, 3 in the morning, there's nobody, there's 1 or 2 cars parked on Cliff Road. There's no cars parked downtown. There's very few cars on Center Street, or, many of those streets are completely empty. Eastern Street is empty. It starts in the morning at, 7, 8 o'clock. The core fills up first and the town parking lot fills up, and then everything else fills up. And so, I don't think that our problem is from 10 or 11 at night till 8 or 10 in the morning. Our problem is from, 9 or 10 in the morning till 11 at night. And so I think it would be crazy to put enforcement into the times that aren't an issue. Start with what is.
Yeah, I think the issue came up because it's app-based, that if you parked, say, to go off island, then you can still be in Hyannis, log in, and pay to park all day. If we didn't have a time restriction on it. I think that's what came up in our discussion.
Yeah.
So I think we just want to think about that if we go to this 24-hour model, or if we're going to enforce 4 hours.
I don't feel great about the 4 hours, because when someone absolutely does need to park for like 8 hours, they don't have that option. Unless that's okay, I guess, in the 2-hour zones and it's not in the core. But I would say maybe a 12-hour limit would be reasonable. And I don't really love the idea that someone could pay $188 and park for 4 days in season.
No, that doesn't.
I mean, I would like to think that they would say, well, why would I do that? I would take a taxi and leave my car at my house. But there just might be people who are willing to pay that for that convenience.
Yeah, how about, I think before you came the other day, parking, Jason was saying, you reset it, every 24 hours. So, in the middle of the night, you'd have a time that reset. So you'd be stopping that exact thing, depending how you set it up. And he was in it, yeah, so anyway.
Yeah, I would agree with the 96 hours and not allowing that to be paid for. The other thing that came up that we hadn't discussed at all are how we deal with the disability spaces and whether they get charged at all. I don't think they should be.
The handicap spaces?
Handicapped, yeah.
It's state law. You can't charge parking for handicap spaces. You could park there for 12 hours
and
not move it.
They exist, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I can see a lot of that happening.
Anything else we should go over?
Next steps.
Should we continue? Do we want to close this public hearing, or do we want to continue it? I mean, I think that the public should continue to be a part of this process, but.
Do we need a public hearing to do it? Do you advertise differently?
I mean, we could just allow public comment next time we bring it up. So we'll close the public hearing for tonight.
I'll move to close it.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. Thanks, everyone, for their input.
And then are we gonna discuss tonight next steps? What are our next steps? So we keep this on track.
It seems that we need to have some clarification of how the grace period would work, as well as how the scanners work. Because I think that's going to be one of the more important decisions we need to make soon.
And then who's going to do that, and how are we going to do that?
I have a thought. I jotted down a lot of notes tonight, and there's a lot of things that I think staff needs to reconvene about a little bit, including timing, equipment, resources, staffing, lots of unanswered, not totally unanswered, but lots of questions that came up tonight that really need to be clarified, both on our end and the public's end and the board's end. So why don't you give us a couple of weeks to work on that, and maybe we can come back with maybe one or two of you could be in on that once we've got ourselves a little organized, so we can sort of vet it a bit with you. And I started to formulate in my mind a little bit of recommendation, but I don't really want to go get it out right now because I want to think about it some more and consult with staff a little. So maybe by the 20th, we could come back to you with something that is sort of, hopefully, answer some of the questions and maybe has some revised or additional or modified recommendations and go from there. But by that time, I think, will we have our RFP back by then? When is it due? Yeah. The RFP responses will be back in by then, so maybe we can work that in a bit too. I don't know if we will have fully evaluated them by then, but that's what I'm thinking right at the moment.
Have you sent the RFP to us? Did I just miss it?
I think it was.
Was it in a packet or?
Yeah, you don't usually get them, but
All right, I'd like a copy. I'd like
it's
to
out.
see it. Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Okay, so we'll just plan to discuss this again on November 20th.
With the note that we'd be taking public comment, even though it's not a public
Yes.
hearing.
Oh, sure. Does everybody want a quick break?
Good.
I'm not so much worried. I think you were right. Get the turnover. That means you gotta get cars moving out.
No, I get
You
your,
understood that.
no, I get your point completely. You're saying more cars are gonna be driving in and out every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're thinking of it pretty much in downtown area. I'm thinking of the extra 1,500 cars a day that are coming out Sparks Avenue.
Oh, no, and I agree with you, and they're coming anyway, and they're circling around in town. They're coming through already, and
Just having more turnover.
well, no, you're not having more turnover. You have more, if you price it right, you change behavior. What people are forgetting, and what they're so mad about, is they don't want to. They've got it figured out for themselves, and they don't want to change, and they don't want to. They don't want to. They don't want to be. They don't want to change. They've got themselves sorted out, and so and what we're trying to do is do something that everyone has to give a little bit, and that's a very hard thing to do.
As long as Todd stays away from my car.
Oh, if we had done this 25, 30 years ago, we'd have parking in yards still. By not charging for parking, we'd allow this to happen. No, we can't believe that.
Can we get started again? Everybody ready? Oh, okay. Next, we've got an update on the new Harbor Master building project under the town manager's report.
Sorry, Deputy Chief is the town's project manager, not the owner's project manager, but town department manager for this project. And we were just going to give you an update was our plan. And to mention the unfortunate need to use the town lot a little bit for this project next summer.
Thank you. Charles Gibson. The issue we're having right now with the parking area is that we don't even have a contractor yet. We don't know the scope of the project because we're still in design phase for the structural aspects of the building. We're sort of stuck between the FEMA flood maps, the soils, and handicap access. And the structural engineers, I was told a few days ago that they've finally solved those issues, and now they're moving forward with finishing up the construction documents. So we hope to be out to bid for the project by January. And we stay on schedule, we'll be awarding in February with construction to begin as soon as the weather breaks in the spring. The area that's outlined there is what the architects have pointed out is a potential site for a contractor trailer. We also need some sort of temporary office, at least for the dock people at the town pier, because they have to manage the transient boaters and the activity in the summer on the docks. We're also looking at some temporary toilet facilities of some type. So when the building comes down, there won't be any bathrooms for people in the mooring fields. So we're looking at that and talking with the harbor master about the best way to approach that. Shower facilities would be very limited. We've been in some tentative talks with the boat basin and how we can work that out. We're also looking at using a portion of the beach area for maybe some staging, so we wouldn't have to be into this town pier lot as much. But again, that's going to rest with Concom when we do permitting about what they'll let us use for an envelope on that site. It's a little early to say exactly how much space we'll need, but we'll need some space in that front portion of the parking lot. Basically, it's the area outlined there, which is the town slip holder spaces.
Yeah, so those aren't actually straight up public spaces that would
Correct.
be impacted. It'll be the boat spaces.
It's a benefit for the town pier people, so maybe they need to share a little bit of the pain. But again, that's just a rough guesstimate at this point. It might be smaller if we can use more of the west side of the road for staging and contractors area, but we'll still need some temporary office space for the contractor and, as I said, for the town pier staff.
The time frame for this is about a year of construction.
Yes.
Is that correct?
We would hope to have the project finished by January, February of '21. That's the timeline right now.
Has anybody talked to the land bank about whether we could stage anything on their open lots that are right there?
That's all town lots there. The town had, that's all town property there. I think the one that maybe
no,
one
to
the one end,
to the left of the store there. Yeah.
Yeah, the town, those are town-owned lots, the two there. I think the third one is land bank, but the one immediately adjacent that's town property.
Oh,
there.
I meant the other side, but yeah.
Oh, that's that's Brant Point Marine on that side.
On the other side of it.
On the further side.
Yeah.
It
was just a thought.
Yeah, it didn't even occur to us. We could mention it, but again, a lot of that activity there is governed what the Concom will let us do, so we have to be cognizant of that. There's also an issue with a storm drain running through that, basically around the existing building, that's becoming a nuisance that we have to address, and the DPW is working on that. So that's another problem that we have to be aware of there.
I saw you guys, I saw it's been engineered for sort of a 100, 500-year storm and
100.
100-year.
Yeah, and that was been one of the concerns of the 100, 500-year line that the structural engineers were up against with the building code, and they've been in conversation with the State Building Board of Appeals and the local building code on how to work that in with the Class 3 or Class 4 building within that floodplain.
What, and I assume that you're bringing all the mechanicals from above, not from
Yes.
below. What height has been utilized for sea level rise?
Well, right now, the design doesn't have to have the finished floor be above, there's a 9-foot, the VE flood zone there is 9 feet. If we were at 9 feet, the handicap ramps would actually encircle the building. We have to maintain the 1 in 12 pitch that's required by code. We've received a variance from the State Building Board of Appeals to lower the building to 3 feet. However, we have to have a foundation, which is basically a boat foundation that can withstand the 100-year tide. Because of the soil, we've done soil borings there already, so we have to do a pile foundation, and that the issue is, structural is about having that much concrete on piles and how to secure that. That's the structural issue that I'm told they've resolved. But so we're looking right now about 3 feet above grade right now. So we received the variance to bring it down from 9.
Right.
You know, but we have to have a special foundation to do that.
Which is it's an interesting conundrum because of what we're facing and how long. Did we look at sort of using the town across the lot next to the town, keep this in place, build it across the street at a higher level? Was that something that was considered?
It's still within the floodplain.
It still is. I know that, but
and that's an issue on that side. That's a VE9 flood zone there, and any new construction there will have to come up. If you've noticed the houses that are down in Consu Springs, you've seen how high they've had to be.
Right, all the way, yeah, and the floodplain goes all the way up to India
Correct.
Street, yeah. It goes up sort of into the middle of India. So.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, budget reports. This is the sort of second round of first quarter budget reports for this fiscal year, 2020. Got airport first.
Good evening. The airport did a little bit better in revenue the first quarter this year versus last year. It was up 4% or $394,000. And the majority of that came from increase in rentals. We had additional land that we leased, as well as fair market value increases and some other new negotiated leases that we had. And that alone, I'm trying to think, let me see, that was $232,000 of the increase, so that was a majority of it. So things are up a little bit in the revenue. The airport expenses first quarter are down significantly, but a lot of that has to do with timing. It's down about $744,000, but about $637,000 of that was the retirement that was not put in yet this first quarter. So it's still very early in the year. I don't want to get overly excited. I mean, typical Nantucket business. Yeah, if I could shut down now, I'd be fine. I'm doing good, but now I got to get through the winter. So, so we're making progress. We're ahead of last year, but we're not counting our chickens just yet. And we are looking at a positive year again, I think. Any questions or?
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
For Wanna quarter one, that's our big quarter for pumping. July was 109 million gallons. August 97 million, September 84, for a total of that quarter for 290 million gallons. To put that in perspective, we pumped close to 600 million the whole year. So, we're almost halfway after one quarter. We pump a lot of water. That's in that quarter. That's one of the higher numbers we've seen historically in quarter one. Hot summer. Revenues are down 1% overall compared to last year's quarter one. and that's directly related to connection fees. Our water use fee was up, but the water connection fees in this quarter is 28% less than it was before last year. So that's, I don't know if this is the beginning of what people are predicting, but 28% is a big enough number for us to start paying attention, especially when we're moving forward into the new budget year. Not in any danger, 1% down. I think we can make that up. That's $19,000 is a few service connections. But I will say October is continuing the trend into this quarter of fewer new connections than there used to be coming in the door. Expenses are all looking pretty good. They're down about 25% to last year's quarter. We're doing more and more in-house, as I say every time I come in front of you guys. We're doing a lot of training ourselves and doing a lot of the things we used to use consultants and engineering firms for, we're doing ourselves. Some of the bigger expenses that we had was a $31,000 expense for some new survey equipment. We do all our in-house surveying. We locate all our stuff, do all of our own CAD work. Our RTK unit we use for surveying actually died. We bought it used like 8 years ago. To replace that unit itself for us to continue was 31 grand. And another big expense was $25,000, and that was spent on down well probes that are permanently left in monitoring wells to monitor conductivity. Salt water is more conductive than fresh water. Checking for saltwater intrusion, pH, salinity levels, and those are about $5 or $6 grand a piece. My goal is to get as many of those in all the wells that we have, and eventually have maybe 30 or 40 of them out there. We got to do a better job of keeping an eye. In the last year or so, totally my fault, didn't lose scope of what's really important, but it's more than just supplying water. We really have to spend more time and a little bit more money on keeping an eye on the aquifer itself. But overall, I think Wannacomit's in a good place. We're doing well.
Mark?
Yeah.
Before you put these probes in, how did you look at saltwater intrusion? I'm just curious.
We have a model that we run and update, and then we would take samples, routinely go out and take samples, which if you add that up over time, that's paying labor hours to go out. We collect them, send them to the lab fees, shipping fees. Just looking at it in a 2 or 3 year span, these probes will be cheaper than the continual sampling. And plus it's live Bluetooth device that we can connect to if you stand close enough to the well. And it's 24-hour data is what we're really trying to look for. So we can hit these peak seasons like Q1 and really get an idea how it is from the beginning to the end, not just once a month when we sample. That way, if something does happen, it's kind of like the doctor keeping track of your vital signs. I mean, we don't want to miss it and then have a heart attack. We want to catch it before.
Thank you.
So that's why we're dumping more money into that, and we will continue to do that.
I was just wondering what a cross-connection device test was.
So cross-connection, they're devices that are tested. They're backflow devices, so nothing from like a fire suppression system that runs off water that's connected to our water main has a backflow device that makes it so the stuff that's in there can't get into our water main. By code, they have to be tested twice a year. So we have hundreds of those that get tested. And that number is going to grow. Now as commercial buildings, I think new building code and everything's got to have sprinkler systems. So every time a new commercial building, we're going to have another device to check. Any questions on Wannacommit?
Do you still check if there's two different lines coming in? So if someone has one line that comes in just for their sprinkler and another line for the building, you still have to check?
We still check, just to make sure that nobody did some midnight plumbing or anything. We do check when we can. Sconset is it's steady. It doesn't change much. I think we did one service out there in that quarter. Revenues up a little bit, $2,000. Our expenses are down quite a bit. we're doing more and more again in Sconset on our own. We finally finished the pump station upgrade. We did that just with a little bit of engineering guidance, but all the construction was by us, and all the installation of the equipment was by us. So we'll continue to do that in Sconset. Again, waiting for a few of those subdivisions out there that once they begin, the revenue will probably kick up a little bit for Sconset. But Sconset's in a solid place too. They didn't pump any less water than they did last year. They're really steady. They're not seeing a drop in connections in Sconset. We're good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. David Gray, Sewer Department. There's some numbers that we're up about 21% in the first quarter over last year. And a lot of that has to do with the SHMO system coming online. To date, we've done 117 permits just alone for the SHMO project area. So we're about 200 sewer permits already for the year. Last year we did 270 for the whole year. So our permits are up. The sewer privilege fees also, you'll know, was another big spike, but that had to do with a lot of timing on billing and a lot of timing on a lot of people have paid off their sewer privilege fees. That equates to just about 66 SPS being paid in full, that kind of a jump. So we're seeing an awful lot of activity. Permitting, I know when I left the office tonight, I had another 24 permits sitting there for me to approve. So, and a lot of it has to do with the SHMO, which has been good. Operating expenses, we are down some 12% in the first quarter. Chemicals and sewer supplies were also down, along with some sludge disposal fees were down. Just because of the way we're handling treatment and handling our dewatering process. One of the big spikes we had was maintenance, repairs and maintenance, and just like Mark, we're starting to do a lot more of that ourselves. We did have one significant, we had a telephone pole go through a sewer main that we had to replace, and that was like a $26,000 charge for us. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the sewer department. Like I said, we're way up on permits, and a lot of that has to do with SHMO. One of the other big upticks we're seeing nowadays is a lot of renovations, and as the deputy's having issues down in his flood zone, we're seeing a lot of homes getting raised in that Hulbert Avenue area. So there's a lot of activity in permitting and inspections. So we're keeping busy out there, but. Like Mark, I mean, we were treating approximately 64 to 68 million gallons of wastewater a month, about 2 million gallons every day, 2+ million. So our numbers were up as well. For being a dry season, our numbers were up. Just goes to show how busy we were on the island this year. So that's all I really have. So
is that because of SHMO as well, or did they not really? They're just coming online.
No, SHMO is just now coming online. I think we had 5 or 6 permits in the summer season come through the SHMO project. A lot of it was held off until all of a sudden, like I said, there's 5 to 10 every other couple of days coming in for those areas. So SHMO is really on a big uptick. So right now.
So the first quarter is more people.
What it typically after they get to the end of the summer, construction starts again. No one wants construction in the summertime, so this is when we see this quarter, and then the next quarter we'll see a big uptick, and then it will start to slow down a little bit. But a lot of activity going on. So, all right, thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the budget reports. Valet Park of America, report on the 2019 valet parking program.
Hello, everyone. Tim Graney. I know you've heard everything tonight that you want to hear about parking, but let's talk about it a little more. So just to, everyone has the numbers from this past season as compared to the season before. And to be perfectly honest with you, with making such a drastic change in location and the operation, I was surprised at the numbers that they came in as high as they did. So, to be honest with you, that number of 4,878 cars on the season, when people were having a difficult time even finding us, in back behind the town building, I think that number was a really surprising number for me. Especially with the amount of pass holders that we lost. And those are people that prepaid or bought ahead of time to have a plan of where they were going to park, as well as the overnight parking people that we lost on a regular basis because we didn't get the permission to get the overnights until we were already into the project. So once that kind of happened, it wasn't a planned thing. It was more of the overnights we got at that point were, oh no, I have nowhere else to go. What am I going to do? So with losing those volumes, and for these numbers to still come in where they did was very surprising. Some of the things that I will say about the town lot that we heard from as far as positives, a lot of people leaving the island for a day or two used the town lot and thought it was great for getting down for somewhere to go. We had quite a few fishermen who were doing night trips who would park themselves with us, or they would have their patrons park with us. As far as workers, some of the comments of the workers who weren't upset that we were stealing their spaces per se were that they were happy to know that they could go somewhere and have a space, and they didn't have to show up an hour before work driving around searching for a space. So those were the workers that we were parking on a regular basis. The other comments we had was, I'm leaving my car with a whole bunch of stuff in it and I'm going off island. I'm glad to know that someone's here watching it. Or even when there were empty spaces in the town lot, some people would park with us and say, I'd rather have you guys park it because I know it's not going to get damaged while it's here. So those were the positives that we received about the service. Obviously, there were some negatives that I'm sure you folks heard as well. The newspaper did not help our cause at all with the article that they came out with. That definitely hurt the PR. As far as the feeling of ownership from some of the adjacent neighbors to that parking lot as their own personal parking area. That definitely was a challenge that we faced. And I would say that, there was times when the lot would be empty in the morning when town workers were coming into work, typically before 8:30. And, I will say this, is that if we weren't there holding those spaces, there would be no spaces for anyone visiting town to do business. They're gone. Because that many employees would definitely be there. And standing there in that parking lot all day, you might have 1 to 2 spaces where people leave out of that town lot during the day. So those are the things that I found while I was there. I heard some people say that, earlier that this isn't something that we're going to do next year, and that's, certainly your decision to make. One of the things that I would say is consistency is the key here. Whatever you choose, one of the things you noticed in the past 5 years, from 2012, or even, from 2012 to 2018, or 6 years in that period, was we had National Grid, people knew where they were going. We had the downtown location, people knew where they were going. People got adjusted to that. People went to those spaces. Parking wasn't as much of an issue in downtown. Last year we made a change. Parking became, a flare-up, and you felt it all summer long. And I think unless we come up with a plan that we can stay with, and get consistent so people can adjust to that plan and make plans for their parking, because those were the calls we were getting in May. I'd say hundreds of them at my office. Well, where am I going to go? And I said, well, I don't know yet. So that people have a vacation here. They're coming here. They're bringing their cars, whether we like it or not. And they get one, sometimes 2 vacations a year. They want a plan for what they're going to do. So coming up with a plan that's going to be consistent, I think, is going to be important. The downtown stand, just to give you our feedback on that, the 6 spaces were definitely needed. There were times where we did even have cars outside of that 6 spaces that we had talked about when Matt asked the question about backups and pushes, and where we had cars doubled up. That did happen. So I will say that we made our best effort to try to keep those cars moving and to get those cars out of town as quickly as possible. We even had people texting ahead. We pushed the time out to 20 minutes for them to text ahead to get their car back from downtown. We did our best to staff up on days where it was raining, and our best to staff down on days when it was sunny, because on days when it's sunny, everybody goes to the beach. On days when it's raining, everybody comes downtown. It's tough to schedule your staff that way or hire people for rainy days, but we did make an effort, and I think Eric and the team of guys that was out here on a everyday basis did an amazing job with trying to keep those cars moving.
How much busy do you think it is on a rainy day?
A lot.
It could be 3 times busier.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So the other pieces to this is in the town lot, we did the bag check. The bag check, as far as that goes, was down by 1,205 bags. Now, I would say that the biggest thing, again, consistency. People knew where we were. People went there. We had a lot of people saying they were having difficulty finding us, that there was hardly any signage, and they were correct. To be honest with you, the only sign we have for our downtown stand outside of Town Hall is the sign that's on my podium. The only sign that we had for the town lot was one little sign right across the street from the town lot saying that's where you go in. If you missed that little sign, you missed it. So I think that signage, in the future, whatever is decided, if you will have us back to do valet, wherever that is, then I think that signage can be approved. But people are creatures of habit as well. So, that consistency again plays a role. As far as I guess with the bag check, I think that the other things that we had people comment was we didn't have as much space this year because we had a small shed, and a lot of times we would actually have to clear everything out of there, operate out of the podium because the whole thing would be full of bags. So we did our best to not have to turn people away and not have to say to them, sorry, I don't have any place for your bags because you've already hauled them all the way out of town to get to us. We're going to try to help you out. But there were times where we had bags outside of the shed, and doing our best to try to assist people. So wherever you move us, I would suggest that you think about the bag piece as a future option. I understand you're also under construction next year, so there's going to be more of a demand in that town lot. So I understand the pressure that you're going to be under to give it up and move the valet from there. I don't know how much wiggle room we have with National Grid, but to be honest with you, if you can kick this can down the road 1 year past that construction, then I would suggest that we put every effort into maybe seeing if they'd be willing to grant us, 1 year. I know they're doing some work and it looks like they're moving in a direction of possibly selling that property, but I really don't think that that's going to happen in the next year time frame. So if we can go to them or you as a select board and ask them to work with you. I think that next year with that construction that you're going to have on that end of town, because the people going to that end of town are going to the Main Street side. The people going to the Valet stand down on Broad Street that's the people going out at night. To be honest with you, Broad Street was slower during the day. I would say 10 to 15 cars during the day. And I would say the majority of that traffic did come at night. So, and I would say the majority of our traffic at the town lot was for lunch through early evening. It wasn't the late night dinner crowd that we were getting. And I don't know how many people we lost just because they didn't know where we were, but that's what I can give you as far as a report for how this year went. Is there any questions anybody had that I didn't answer? Or?
I just had a question about the year-to-year numbers from 2013 to 19, and I just thought it was interesting that you sort of peaked 2015, 16, but then last year dropped quite a bit. Do you have an idea why?
Uber.
Okay.
The impact, and actually, to be perfectly honest with you, this past year, I'd say the location where we feel Uber the most is actually at Galley Beach in our operation out there at the restaurant, because people are going out for a nice dinner and sometimes enjoying some drinks. I think people have a tendency, and it's an isolated area. You're either going there for that restaurant or you're not going there. So I think that what we noticed is last year our numbers dropped there in 2018, and this past year they went back up. So I don't know if Uber got a little inconsistent or what the story was there. David did tell me that his numbers were slightly up. So now, one other thing I do want you to know is I did have conversations with quite a few restaurant owners in the downtown. They said that they basically don't think that they can do without the valet, that's an option for keeping their customers on time for the reservations, and that they tell all their customers, listen, if you can't find a spot, go to the valet, they can take care of you. So it's just an alternative that I don't think the town wants to do without. The problem is the labor it takes to get the cars out to Jetty's Beach is enormous. I mean, 10 to 15 cars during the day at downtown, I had to staff 4 people just to keep the weight reasonable, and to keep from backing up. So at night, there was times when we'd be pulling people because it just got busy. It was raining. We'd be pulling people from all over accounts. I had 12 people on. So my labor cost went through the roof this past year. It was something that I was expecting. I was somewhat planning because of we weren't sure what to expect. That being said, one thing is that, whatever the town decides to do, that definitely is going to impact the amount of money I would be able to pay the town for the use of those spots, because the consideration of how much labor it takes to do that location definitely plays a factor into my math.
What I said earlier is I don't think that we will be able to do the town lot again with taking spaces for the marine building, and I mean there were real issues with giving up a section of the town lot in my mind. But I think that the Valley is a good service, important to a lot of people, and people have become used to it. And I don't have an issue with Broad Street personally. But obviously we would have to solve the luggage storage. I feel like the luggage storage, if we could figure it out, would be more successful if it was closer to the ferries.
100%. I think that impacted our numbers as well.
But those are just my initial thoughts.
Yeah, and it's too bad because that service should be happening at the ferries. It should be happening closer to where it's used, and that all changed, with 9/11 and terrorism and everything else. There used to be places that you could leave your stuff down, you could put it in a locker and put it in a room and leave it. They don't let you do that anymore. So it's sort of, it's interesting. And whether you guys do it or the town takes, if someone else takes it on, it's something to think about in that entire area, because it's clearly, it's popular, even when it's as inconvenient and hidden as yours was.
Sure.
So.
Sure. And that being said, one other thing that I would say is, and I know there was a debate about this, and as the operator, giving the option for people to purchase seasons passes. I mean, not only did I have tourists and vacationers purchasing those, but we also had people that work downtown purchasing those. And I think that, whatever plan moves forward, that has to be on the table, because people rely on that, and then they can plan out their summer of what they're going to do for their parking. And then also the other thing is the overnight piece. You want people downtown staying in these beds and breakfasts and in these inns, and some of them have cars. There has to be an option for them of where they're going to go. And, they're willing to pay the money, which is greater than your, it's cheaper than buying a residential permit for us to do it. So I just think that leaving that option open for people to leave their car overnight with the valet services is also another crucial piece.
Yeah, my quick math shows you guys down in total about 30, 31%, 32%, something like that. And I'm wondering, is it worth, how long do you continue doing it if that's at that level?
Well,
with the business you did this year, I'm surprised you're back here asking.
Because I would have to adjust the amount of money that I paid to the town. So this past year, the number was $18,000, which that number would have to be reduced in order for me to make it work. I'm never in things for the short run. When I came out here in 2012, I had told Diane O'Neill, which I saw her getting off the boat today and had a great conversation with her. I told Greg, I'm not in this for the short run. I'm in this for a partnership. I truly, care about where we work, and that goes to our company's credit of why we've been in business for 30 years, and we typically don't lose any clients. So I will say it's not just about the money for us. So that's why I'm here. I'm hoping that we can turn it around and make it profitable again in the future.
And do you make enough from all the other, without giving you numbers, with the other private businesses you work for?
Right. Obviously, it becomes a whole package. So yes, this year overall was another good year for us. It's just all of it plays a role now at this point, because if I didn't have those other businesses, I wouldn't have had those 12 people to pull from. To say, okay, we're getting buried over here. Everybody who's slow, get over there and fix that problem over there. So it's taken us a long time to build up the staff and build up our knowledge of the island, and have this presence, and also that balance and that trust with your community, the local community. I feel like a lot of them trust us with their vehicles, and they trust us with their parties at their own homes, and they trust us with their businesses like Galley Beach and Cliffside and Great Harbor Yacht Club, and so those places certainly are great partners.
Questions, comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. Absolutely. One of the things that I would just ask is that, and I know you're parking out today because I am already too, but just if we could have a follow-up discussion of when, moving forward, what are some thoughts? And I'm willing to meet offline with any of you to discuss those, or I'm also willing to help the town with any of the other projects that they have going on. Okay? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
One quick question. What's the industry standard? What percentage would you typically pay to a community, or what's the?
So it's not so much that, but it's I would say it's a whole formula with the amount of labor. Like this is very labor intensive, going out to The challenge I'm facing in Massachusetts, and this now goes into Connecticut and New York, is labor costs are going up. And I'm sure everyone who has a business here understands that. So labor costs are rising, and at the same time, I'm adding labor. Labor is my product. So my costs are going through the roof. And, I will say you're in a unique situation where Lowell, the town of Lowell, is looking at having to pay a valet service in their downtown to park cars, and then they collect a fee on top of it. Whereas this town is receiving a check for that. Right now, one of the things that I talked to you a little bit offline was I do think that next year